Could I ask everyone to turn off their mobile phones, please? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our very wet South of England Agricultural Society. For our farming conference this year, entitled We Need to Talk About Food. I should just want to say a few words before I hand over to Charlotte. We have several sponsors, as we do every year, and enormous thank you, although we will mention a bit later, to CLM, Complete Land Management, Mayor Baxter, Lloyds Bank, Richard Place Dobson, Fram Farmers, the NFU Mutual, and our media sponsor, South East Farmer. We will be recording this session, and it will make it available for attendees in the next few days. If you're tweeting this evening, do tag us or use hashtag farming conference, which will do the right thing. We have joining by Zoom, I think, about 150 people to add to those in the room tonight. If you are, and you're there in the queue waiting or watching now, you don't have to be seen, nor do you have to be heard, in case you were wondering. But please type in your questions, and they'll be picked up and answered by our panel. Charlotte.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name's Charlotte Smith, and as you can tell, because I have the clipboard of self-importance, I'm in charge. This society has come up with a very timely topic for us this evening. We need to talk about food. In a week where food inflation is up again, we have egg shortages, partly because of avian flu, but partly, farmers say, because they're producing less or giving up because they're simply not being paid enough. We've also had continuing rows and rumours about the future of agricultural policy here in England. And of course, we had George Eustace's comments on the Australia trade deal. So at the moment, there is a lot to say about food. This evening, our excellent speakers will give us their take on all of this and about the future of our food system. But we also want to hear with you, whether you're here with us in the hall or if you're at home watching on Zoom. It's really easy to ask a question. If you're here in the hall, just stick your hands in the air and wave them around. If you're at home, then all you have to do is type your question into the Q&A box. But if you could hold all those thoughts until the Q&A question after all the speakers have spoken, that would be much appreciated. It would be also much appreciated if you could ask a question and keep it brief. Thank you very much. Right, let's start with our first speaker, Judith Batchelor. She's the former brand director at Sainsbury's. She was also their head of agriculture and sorted out sustainability for the supermarket too. She is currently the deputy chair of the Environment Agency. Judith is going to talk about some of the fundamental challenges that we face in transforming our food system. Judith.
Thank you. Thank you. So the first question is, can you hear me? Yeah. Perfect. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. When you leave a large organisation like Sainsbury's after 17 years, you think that you're not going to have any friends anymore. So when I get invited to speak at these things, I feel somewhat reassured that people still might be interested, that I might have something interesting to say. So I hope it will be this evening. So the things that I really want to talk about, and Charlotte's touched on it, is some of the more fundamental things that we need to deal with in terms of our food system. And I'm looking at that from a retailer's perspective. So the things that I'm going to share with you are, some of them might be thought-provoking, some of them might be things that you agree with or don't agree with, and I'm sure that will create, hopefully, some lively questions at the end. But I share these things with you on the basis of 35 years working in various parts of the supply chain. I haven't always worked in retail, and some of the things that I've observed over those times. And I'm going to start with the global food system. And the reason I say that is sometimes we are very insular about our food. And one of the things was the great privilege when I was working in retailing was the fact that I got to travel all over the world looking at whether it was coffee from Ethiopia or tea from India or bananas from Colombia. But roughly around half of our calories that come into this country come from outside of the UK. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is probably another whole debate, subject for next year perhaps. But the point is we are part of a global food system and we forget that at our peril. And one of the biggest issues we've got with that global food system is that it is broken. And we talk about our food system here, and Henry has talked a lot about that and produced that fantastic national food strategy, which talked about ways that we could fix our broken food system. But we're part of a broken global food system. And it doesn't matter what lens you look at that global food system through, whether it's water, whether it's food waste, whether it's plastic pollution in our oceans, whether it's people that are hungry. There are things that just aren't working, and we need to transform it. But because we are part of a global system, it's not just down to us. We have to work with others. So one of the first big challenges that we have in all of this is that we're part of a global food system, but we all literally work in our own mini food systems. And if you think about what does that mean in practice, the cost of the fact that we are not harmonised, and even if you just look at financial reporting, forget what we might want to report on greenhouse gases or what we might want to report on biodiversity. There is no harmonised reporting standards, and it's estimated that this costs trillions of dollars every year in divergence. And again, we've just left the EU. You will know that there's a lot of EU retained law. That clock is ticking away on EU retained law, and we have to bring those bits of legislation. And if I think about the Environment Agency alone, that is 600 pieces of legislation that need to be reviewed. We're running out of time to do that. So it is impossible for us to think about how we might fix this massive global food system if we're all measuring things differently, we're reporting on things differently, and in many instances using a completely different currency and metrics to measure those things. So challenge number one. Challenge number two is around what we eat. And there's this country, we have a thing called the Eat Well Guide, and it's pretty well understood and established. It's taught in schools. We all know what it is, but we don't do it. We don't eat our 5 fruit and veg a day. We don't eat enough fibre, so on and so forth. But that's true of the world. And what we have in our global food system is production on one side and consumption on the other side. And which one is a function of the other is an interesting conversation to have, because fundamentally, if we don't produce it, you can't consume it, and vice versa. The problem we've got is what the world should be eating is nowhere close to what the world is producing. And therefore, we have to transform that massive food system. And again, how do you go about that? And if to make matters even more complicated, 30% of what we consume comes from around 500 million smallholder farmers. So these are people producing tea, coffee, cocoa, sugar, bananas, rice around the world on very small plots of land, earning small amounts of money, and very, very disaggregated and very hard to reach. And we have a responsibility for those people, because the irony is, and it's a really sad irony, that these are the people that are going to be most impacted by climate change. They are the people living in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. So thinking about how that might work and how you transform those value chains to make sure that the value gets where it needs to get. But more importantly, many of the crops that these smallholder farmers are now growing, they're not going to be able to grow in the future. And you only need to look at things like coffee yields coming out of Ethiopia with climate change to understand that. And we are now in the middle of one of the many cyclical crises that we've had over the years, with inflation, the worst it's been in 40 years, and all the things that I don't need to tell you about because you're living them every day. And it's really difficult when you have got all of these cyclical challenges, whether that's currency, whether that is inflation, whether that is the availability of labour and workforces. It's very difficult when you're faced with what I call those cyclical challenges that will come and go, the ones we have no control over, to think about the structural things we need to be doing. But the structural things are where the cost efficiencies, the cost effectiveness come in, and the structural things are the things that are going to get us to net zero, that are going to help us restore nature and restore biodiversity. And it's important that we work out how to manage those two things, those cyclical challenges alongside the structural changes that we need to make in our food system in order for it to be resilient, because that's what builds resilient and value chains and adds real value. And again, I will come to how we might do this, by the way, so hold that thought. The first thing that needs to change is how we think about a business case. So in my old world, you'd go to the investment board, you'd have a business case that says, I want to do this, I need to invest this, and the return on investment is this, and the investment board would say, that's a good investment, we'll do it. Sometimes that investment wasn't necessarily a commercial investment, it might be an investment about reputation. It might be an investment that needs to happen because regulation has changed and the cost of doing nothing, so for example, plastic levy on plastic packaging, the cost of doing nothing is going to be enormous, and therefore there is a slightly different business case for doing it. But actually, the business case going forward has got to be much more embracing than just a straightforward financial business case. We have to be able to show the value in these things in other ways, and whether that's the value of nature, whether that's social and human capital, all of those things are basically part of what I would describe as a new kind of connected business case. I won't go into all of that, but there is a way of doing it. And in my old world, this was quite well documented, and I will leave a copy of these slides for you. And the reason I mention that is, for you, a lot of what the supply chain and the food system needs to invest will pay back somewhere else in the food system. The investment might be upstream on farm. The investment might be downstream in stores and retail. But the benefits of that may be seen somewhere else, and there may be benefits for all. So we have got to find a better way of understanding collectively where those investments need to be made, and ensuring that the people that are making those investments are being rewarded in the right way for those investments, because otherwise those system investments will never be made. And they do need to be made because that's what's going to transform our food system. So connected business cases is key. Technology is also key, and there is a lot of really good science that is going on. And if I think about some of the things I've been involved with UK research and innovation, through agri-tech, through centres of excellence, there is no shortage of really good ideas, but those things are not being socialised quickly enough. and we are not retrofitting where we need to retrofit. And that might be something as simple as slurry storage, it might be something much more complex, but we've got to find a way for our sector to retrofit what we do. If we were the car sector, we would be talking about incentives for electric vehicles. We'd be talking about scrappage schemes for diesel vehicles. We'd be talking about tax benefits for benefit in kind for salary sacrifices for company cars. We'd be doing a whole load of things that would enable us to retrofit some of those legacy technologies. And the question is, what is that for us as a sector? And the second, I suppose, the most important thing, as well as the technology, is that we create an environment where those things can thrive. And an enabling environment is quite often the thing that gets forgotten. So how often do we have great policy, and that great policy never actually delivers the outcome that we thought it would, because we haven't created the enabling environment for that policy to thrive. And I give you a really live example. It's a really old one, but I don't know if you remember years ago, Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall did a whole load of programmes around bycatch of fish, and fish that you didn't have a quota for being discarded at sea, perfectly good fish. As part of that campaign, basically there was a piece of regulation that came in, which was the landings obligation. And what it said is, if you catch it, you've got to land it. But of course, if you catch things that you don't have a quota for, and it's landed, that affects someone else's quota. Because if you're catching cod that you don't have a quota for, then the guy who's got the cod quota next time might have a smaller cod quota. And there was no way of really helping fishermen through innovation to be more selective with their fishing gear and invest in fishing gear that would enable them to avoid the bycatch. So actually, and then nobody really worked out how to enforce that piece of legislation, because the ship is hundreds of miles off the coast and nobody can see what they're doing. So that piece of policy and regulation became meaningless. And we can't have that. So we've got to find ways of creating that enabling environment for some of these big decisions and good decisions to be able to be implemented. And then we've got to think differently about people. And having worked in a retailer for a long time, we talk about demographics. So we talk about CDEs, and we talk about household income and all of those kind of things. Those things are important, but we've got to find better ways. And there are whole new data sets and really exciting things going on in this area that enable us to define communities, define places, and define groups of people in ways that we haven't done before. And I'm a big fan of data. I'm not going to go into this, but again, you can look at it. This is about eligibility of free school meals and who's eligible, what the uptake of that is, and the spread of that uptake. This is eFood Deserts Index, where people have got access to fresh food and where they haven't got access to fresh food, and what their food environment looks like. This is supermarkets sharing their data on promotions and geographies around getting people to eat more fruit and veg. I'll come on to this in a minute. And this week, Which launched a campaign with Leeds University Centre for Consumer Data Research, which looked at what they call the Priority Places Food Index, which is 7 domains of food indicators, and shows basically the most vulnerable places in the UK for food vulnerability, I say. That level of data, now freely available to everybody to use, creates a much more targeted approach to challenges. And it is a targeted and tailored approach that we need if we're going to fix some of those things. And then the last area is the whole nature connectedness. And quite often when we talk about environmental health and well-being, we talk about air pollution, we talk about ammonia emissions, we talk about water quality and some of the challenges around all of that. But actually, a lot of the latest research is around the physiological impact of just being close to nature. So when you see the colour green, what does it do to your heart rate? When you are breathing woodland air, what does that do to your physiology of your lungs? And I put that up there because UKRI are spending a lot of money on what they're calling nature connectedness. And in fact, just next door at Wakehurst, there is a whole nature connectedness project looking at some of those things. So that may be something we want to come back and revisit in the future. But the bottom line of all of this is, how do we work as a collective? And when do you go together and when do you go alone? And I said before when I talked about automotive industry, they're very good at deciding when they need collective action as an industry. Now, I say that because you could probably talk to half a dozen key stakeholders and you've pretty much covered the automotive industry. So they're very good at self-organising. We are both highly dispersed and highly consolidated as a food system, but we're not good at self-organising. And certainly when it comes to collective action, we're not good at self-organising. But one of the things that we could collectively do together is to work out where the things that are most important that we have got to change in this food system are, where we want to work together as a sector, and what we need from others to help us do that, and whether that's government, whether that's business, whether that's academics, whether that's investors. Those kinds of things can really be powerful. I've drawn a red line there, and everything to the left of the red line I've called the pre-competitive space. For me, that's the pre-competitive safe space where we can all operate and we can decide what we want the future to be. Getting that aligned collective view of what we want the future to look like is hard work. I mean, Henry knows that better than anyone in the work that he did on the National Food Strategy. But if we could get to that point, and it doesn't matter quite where you draw that red line, then the market can thrive. The market is fully functional, and the market can do what markets do. But if we don't do the bit on the left, the market and the food system will continue to dysfunction. And that means we won't be resilient, we won't be able to stand the knocks and the challenges that we're getting, and we won't be able to build the future food system I know we would all love to see. So, the grandest challenges of our time, as they say, we are the first generation to understand what challenges we're facing and probably the last generation to be able to do anything about it. So that's it from me. Thank you. There's some reading there if you want it. You don't have to, but thank you for listening. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to share my thoughts with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith. I'm sure that will have inspired questions, so please hold those thoughts until we get to the end of our panel. Let's hear next from Tom, who will be familiar to many of you, as he is a member of this society. As you will probably all know, he's an arable dairy, little bit of sheep and some beef farmer from near Lewes, and he's a fourth-generation farmer.
Yep. Thank you. Right, can you hear me okay? Yep. Jolly good. I've been tasked with answering the question, what is the role of farmers and can they step up to meet the challenges of food production? But a bit more about myself. Farming about 1,250 acres on the Firle estate, as Charlotte said, fourth generation. We have 200 dairy cows on an Arla 360 contract, 200 Aberdeen Angus dairy bred cross cattle, 550 North of England mule ewe lambs that I buy as shearlings, as ewe lambs and run round to shearlings and sell them to my very good neighbours nearby. Of the 1,250 acres, we have 500 acres of wheat, maize, spring barley, spring oats, and grass clover lays, with 3 full-time employees and Dad and myself. So I want to look at this in 3 ways. because it's quite a large topic. So this has just helped me get my head around it. In my eyes, none of these factors is more important than the other. They're all inextricably linked, and delivery of the government food strategy requires all of these to be backed up by a clear and concise leadership from government. Well, I want to start with people. Our farming community is the least talked about of these three, or if we are, it often feels in a negative way, insofar as by producing food, we are negatively affecting the environment. Pretty much all the farmers I know want to produce food in an efficient, environmentally sound way that enables bills, rents, and a living to be paid for their toils and risks taken. It's hard graft farming, and it's created a resilience through the generations that I believe has been taken for granted by policymakers, the food industry and the public for far too long. We always put cows back in calf, the tups in, wheat, barley and oilseed rape back in the ground, no matter what the challenges are. Do you think our skills are appreciated? I often feel that the image of a farmer is still struggling to get away from a simpleton chewing on a piece of straw or to a large barley baron adding to grain mountains. My concern is which image policymakers have in mind. Probably a bit of both. I thought I'd put up a nice slide here of the Burke Trophy that happened just out here last summer. And these people are the lifeblood of the Ag Society here and the local landscape. And for Elizabeth, I thought I'd put some Sussex there. I would like to say that farmers are continuous problem solvers, plant experts, bookkeepers, accountants, amateur bird watchers, animal husbandry experts, soil health monitors and improvers. We're risk takers, we are vulnerable, we are teachers, students and family people. There's a lot going on here to try and reconcile, but reconcile all this we must if we're to step up to the challenge. So how do we reconcile this? Well, I like to surround myself with good people, good staff, good business contacts, such as Nick Parle and his colleagues at Cliff Farm Vets, Bodle Brothers, who are just down the road, the team at Frown Farmers, Ian Powell from the Dairy Group, and Ben Thorpe from Agravista. But most importantly of all of those, is good friends, people I can chew the fat with, be honest about the muck-ups I've made, and be proud of each other's successes. It's all about using far cleverer people's brains to help me on my way. I also know that this isn't for some people, and this needs to be addressed as well. It is something that we, as a society here, are spending a lot of time and thought on trying to create environments where everyone is happy to come and learn and listen to advice, getting the right people in to give this advice on the right topics at the right time so that people feel it is worth giving their time, investing their time in. Another programme that we run here by the Education Committee is the grants for land-based skills and qualifications. The grants are for people of any age who are already working in land-based industries, including ag, horticulture, viticulture, equine, forestry and land management, and require certain skills, certifications or qualifications. The grants can be provided for a wide range of skills such as spraying, chainsaw use, sheep shearing or first aid. They can also be used by people who want to develop the management skills, as long as they're already working in a land-based industry. If anybody would like to know more, see the chap in the red polo shirt back there after the meeting. He's called Alan Smith. This is a short video of my hill ground that I took in early July of this year, and it's where I go to get a bit of peace and quiet away from dairy cows. This has been created by my father and grandfather. They had some downland in the 1980s that was cleared of gorse, in the early 1970s, and it was put into spring barley production. Yields were never any good, the land was far too poor. So in the mid-1980s it went into a grass ley where big bale silage and hay were made for a few years, before Dad entered it into the ESA scheme in 1987. We signed up to the RSPB Downland Farm Bird Monitoring Scheme in 2010, and here you can see our counts in 2010 and 2018. How we've moved from 5 red list species to 12. This is on a 200-acre block as well. 23 species in total on the first day they recorded, up to 45 in 2018. And everything that they saw in 2010, they saw again in 2018. We have created this habitat using the right grazing regime for bird life and flora to flourish. We also have had wildflower, butterfly and moth counts done by David Harris from the Sussex Butterfly Conservation and Helen Proctor from the Sussex Botanical Recording Society. And they come out to walk 3 or 4 times in the summer to identify and collate what's growing on the farm. They always enjoy themselves as they find various red list species and let me know what they find. I think the plan for next July is to have an open day for local botanists on the farm. So that would be an education for me. Next up, I've got a little slide here. Can anybody identify this plant? There must be a botanist in here. No. I'll save the pain of you all trying to guess, sorry. It's the field fleawort. It's a member of the daisy family, and they only found 30 in East Sussex before they came around our hill, where they found approximately 500 in a small patch. The question I get asked is how we get these up to these species here, and it all started again with Grandpa and Dad, grazing with cattle and sheep on a bit of poaching, but not too much, taking livestock on and off as they were needed. For anyone that remembers my grandfather, he was a market man through and through. He would think that we're all mad what we're doing here, but would be chuckling along to think he set the foundations for the diversity we have now. The best way we found to farm is by reading the ground, not farming by dates as we are often dictated by. We farmers are the ones on the ground day in and day out and know the land better than anyone. I do wish there's more faith in us sometimes. In more recent years, we've been taking out poorer areas of arable fields, cutting hedges in February and every other year, planting hedges, although not very successfully this spring. In more recent years, all this has been possible due to the payments we have received. Our environmental gains have been good for the public, ourselves and nature. I'm lucky that the seed bank was already there. Nature just needed its chance. I think that most people with country knowledge know how quickly things can revert back. The harder bit is letting things revert back to what we want and what is needed and practical. Moving on again to the need for nature, natural capital, biodiversity net gain and carbon capture are here to stay. Speaking as a tenant farmer, nature and natural capital are approaches that I can undertake. They can be built into my business plan as an enterprise. I would struggle far more with carbon capture and biodiversity net gain. I know people get very excited about these two elements, but I'm extremely worried about them. I feel they are threats to the web of people that maintain food production and bring about actual positive nature change. I need to understand how it will be measured to provide continuity and consistency. We all know and appreciate the vagaries of weather and seasons. But will algorithms be so nuanced? Will the inspectors on the ground have the right understanding? I think that's a question for Anthony Weston and maybe some others from CLM to answer, as I know they wrote a good article in this month's South East Farmer on biodiversity net gain. I also know that with all the nature benefits that have been brought onto our farm in the last 25 years, we have no case for biodiversity net gain. We can't gain any more. And as a tenant, I can't monetize it anyway. And carbon capture is a science I don't understand yet. Is there an international standard? Whose methodology is right? And are trees better than grass and ruminants? I can understand non-inversion of soil and moving towards zero-till farming, which bring me on to the last part of the web. Food. I feel it's the staple needed to fuel the workforce who drive the economy. Without food on the shelves and in people's stomachs, society would quickly break down to less settled times. As I said earlier, we farmers, we always put cows back in calf and crops in the ground. The understanding from our side is there's a market for it at the end and a price to be paid back to us. We know the risks we take, and for a long time, if the market price hasn't been there, the government has effectively picked up the tab. But now our risk level has increased massively. Agflation is running around 34%. Can we justify fertiliser costs? Should we justify fertiliser costs? Global politics is playing with commodity prices. We can buy seed and fertiliser, we can sell forward or sit tight. We can play the markets, we can make choices. But if we are not careful, it may become a choice between food or the environment. In my eyes, this is not a healthy scenario. It should not come to this. There needs to be room for both, but in a way that suits landscapes, soil types, history and people. Agriculture is a science or practice of farming, including cultivation of the soil for growing of crops and the rearing of animals to provide food, wool and other products. This is the Oxford Dictionary definition of agriculture, and I think we'd all do well to remember it. Unfortunately, Sheila couldn't be here to talk today, but I want to just refer to her question here. And I believe that it is possible to produce nutritious, sustainable food, but affordable food is a far harder concept to nail down. I think our role as farmers is to produce foodstuffs. Affordability is a political and personal decision. So to help with our step up to meet the challenge of food production, we have many tools to aid us. Using home as an example, we have just started on a genomic testing journey, only breeding from our best cows. Although this is something we've always done by records and the herdsman's knowledge, it is now backed up by far better and more robust data. This is because we are looking to constantly strive to create a better herd of cows. We're looking for a slightly smaller cow who will stay in the herd longer, producing more lifetime milk while eating less food. This massively helps our carbon footprint per litre through protein efficiency, feed efficiency and animal robustness. It also adds to our beef cattle enterprise as we moved on to sex semen and beef semen only. We have cut out low-value black and white bull calves and now produce 120 Aberdeen Angus calves a year that we use for our environmental grazing. Regen Ag is hardly a phrase that we can miss at the moment. Whether or not you're a die-hard follower or a non-believer, many of the principles are extremely pertinent. Do not disturb the soil, keeping the soil surface covered, keep living roots in the soil, grow a diverse range of crops, and bringing grazing animals back to the land. I personally am very interested, but very wary of jumping in completely with 2 feet first. I have a landlord to pay and a roof to keep over my head. So I think I fit somewhere in the middle. I need to know more and understand more. But many tweaks to my farming operation can be made. After wheat, we used to leave the ground as open to plough before maize. But now we've just started to put in Westworld grass lay using a stripped hill drill. Then hopefully take off grass silage nice and early so I can get maize in nice and early as well. But this also means that I can get slurry on after the wheat harvest, so put into grass. And then I can hopefully get more slurry on, so I can use the slurry at effective times on the ground when it's needed, when it's right, and I don't have to force things at the wrong time. But time will tell if it's a sensible way forward for my business. I know it doesn't have the diversity within each field and each crop. I know we're meant to be growing 3 or 4 crops at once, or species at once. But I'm still learning, and Rome wasn't built in a day. We'll get there in the end. Regen Ag certainly has many prominent and vocal followers. I just hope that the silent majority are not put off from making changes, both small and large, for fear of being called out. Taking steps towards net zero will always help, will help reduce our costs as well. This is being fed through to us by Arla on farm all the time. We can either push back or go with the flow. Seeing what was done for my business, it's far better to go with the flow. Data recording and accuracy of data helps drive on-farm changes. But I don't really like data. It means computers and paperwork, and it's not my thing particularly. To me, farming is about feeding livestock and crops and sweeping the yard if I need to. But as a business owner, I must do it, and ultimately it is worth it. We have a carbon footprint of 0.93 kilos of CO2 per litre, and I think that puts us in one of the top balance producers in Arla. So if I can follow these principles through to other enterprises, then surely the knock-on effect will be seen on my bottom line. But to move this forward, I need to make further changes, which can only be done if the milk price is sustainable. I'd like to put up solar PV to produce my own electricity. But farming where I do on the South Downs, I'm not sure the National Park would give me planning permission. But it's a question I need to broach with them. Robotics and automation are going to have an increasing part to play. I can't talk on behalf of the soft and top fruit growers in the South East, who are no doubt embracing new technologies, but I can talk about what we're doing at home. This calving season has been the first season that we've used automatic calf feeders. I bought them all second-hand, and it's changed calf rearing hugely. Instead of mixing up a lot of milk, lugging milk around, we're now spending far more time observing animals, observing the calves, and just cleanliness and just watching and learning and seeing how they respond. And they look far better for it this year. But it does take a certain character to do it. You need lots of patience. And I find we had a very good vet student this year called Kitty, and she was fantastic. Who just took the time to do it. So, yeah, probably less one for the race around lads on the tractor than someone who's more calm. I'd like to use far more robotics and automation, but it comes down to cost. The grants have been useful, but I'd far rather available all year round. I don't like the rush for grants when they come out. It doesn't necessarily fit with my cash flow at the time or the plan where I'm going. And if you don't meet the deadline, you don't get in. And I don't think that's quite right. But if robotics and automation can take out some of the mundane and laborious tasks of food and commodity production, then I hope this will help the retention of staff within the ag industry. Because we have lots of good people, but quite often the mundane work can get very boring and people just get fed up with it. There are also huge strides to come in the arable sector in the next few years. If we can get the smart technology on farm at a reasonable cost that allows us to target specific weeds without the use of chemical intervention, then I believe this can only be a benefit. We are likely to need to collaborate as farmers with the bigger ticket items, but is that really a problem around here? Many of us in the South East are already members of farmer clusters. We're already attending meetings and swapping ideas, so I think we're 3/4 of the way there. Gene editing, which not to be confused with genetic modification, is an area of science that I think can bring benefits both agronomically and to the consumer. If we can produce wheat that has a lower allergen effect, if it is vitamin enhanced along with drought tolerance, then surely this will be beneficial. We need to be able to combine all these tools to help produce the desired outcomes. But there are also some tools that we lack in the South East. We had the sad news a few weeks ago that Tottingworth is about to shut at the end of January. This has provided an invaluable service to many butchers, farm shops, boxed beef and lamb schemes direct to the consumer. In this day and age of being told how we should reconnect with the public, provide nutrient-dense food, have low food miles, it would be fantastic if the government and local politicians could provide some infrastructure in the South East, or at least start the ball rolling. We have ports enable wheat and barley to be exported out of the area, but both up country and abroad, but not to be processed in huge quantities in the South East. We are £10 a tonne off other parts of the country when it comes to feed wheat and barley prices. And I remember talking to a grain trader up in Lincolnshire who basically said the South East was an inconvenience to come down and fetch our produce. We need investment in food processing here in the South East, but perhaps here we pay the price for our close proximity to London and the beautiful landscapes we live in. So finally, in conclusion, I'd like to summarise by saying that if we farmers are given the tools that are available, alongside our vast range of skills, intelligence, aptitude and resilience, then we can produce food that will not only protect the environment, but also enhance it. What is needed is a framework and leadership from government that we can trust, that is not going to be changed on a whim and is managed in a logical and practical manner. It will not necessarily sit comfortably with everyone, but one thing is for sure, we are at the forefront of food and nature, and we will have to use all the tools available and our versatility to meet the challenges of food production. Thank you.
Wow, you covered a lot there, Tom. Right, let's move on to Henry Dimbleby. Most of you will know he is the author of the government-commissioned National Food Strategy. He's also the lead non-exec at DEFRA. Before all that, he was the founder of Leon, which most of you will know from a train station somewhere. Henry.
Thank you very much for inviting me here this evening. It's always an amazing privilege to come into farming communities and have the chance to talk to farmers straight up about the problems they face. I've been doing it now for 4 years since I came into DEFRA. I hopefully know a little bit more than I did back then, but I am learning all of the time. It's a pretty grim time. Full stop. It's a pretty grim time potentially to be a farmer. On this stormy night, we've actually got rain coming through the window over the screen onto the back of our necks here, and the screen is kind of blowing as the gale comes in. I wanted to, with all the doom and gloom and everyone saying what a terrible food system we had start by actually celebrating what an incredible food system we have. And in many ways, the food system that we have today is a miracle. And the problems that we have, the disasters that we now face, are actually as a result of that miracle. And that miracle was a result of the work that farmers around the globe have done since the turn of the century. What do I mean by that? Well, if we go back, hold on, I'm going to put these up. So if we go back to 1945, basically over the history of human endeavour, whenever we wanted to grow our population, we dug up more land to produce more food. And basically, if you go back to the Holocene, to the time when climate became stable, about 10,000 BC, and we started to farm, as population grew, we dug up more land, we planted more crops, we grew more food. And notwithstanding the British Revolution, guano, potential improvements in crop breeding through the 19th century, this pretty much stayed the same. So this chart shows total agricultural land on the bottom in green, population in black, and global food production in red. And if you read the newspapers at the time after the Second World War, despite the fact that we in this country had nearly starved, we'd gone from producing 30% of our own food, we had dug up our hedges, we had planted food wherever we could, we went to being 70% self-sufficient over that very short period of the Second World War. All of the papers in 1945 were concerned that the global population, would outgrow our ability to feed ourselves. And this was because scientists predicted that thanks to improvements in medication, in sanitation, and growing birth rates, the population of the planet would go from about 2.5 billion, as it was after the Second World War, and grow to 9 billion over the next 100 years. And this was, at the time, in the same way that in my childhood, nuclear war was kind of the thing that we all worried about. It was a thing that was on the front page of the papers. It was a thing that, as children, we were concerned about would happen. In those days, it was global starvation. And it didn't happen because the scientists had reckoned without a man called Norman Borlaug, who many of you will have heard of, a botanist from Idaho. He grew up during the Great Depression. He saw firsthand poverty, he saw food riots, and he grew up with a determination, a mission to help people eat better. And he did that through breeding plants. And towards the end of the war, he was sent by the Rockefeller Institute to Mexico to try and improve farming systems there. And he arrived and he wrote back to his wife that the scenes that he saw had clubbed my mind, was the expression he used. The soil was so poor, farmers were living hand to mouth, crop yields were abysmal, and he said to his wife, I don't know what to do, but we have to do something. And what he did was try to produce a new form of wheat, a form of wheat that took Japanese short-stemmed wheat and bred it with a high-yielding wheat, tall, high-yielding wheat, so that it wouldn't lodge in strong winds, and then bred it again with the rust-resistant wheat. And the Mexicans thought he was mad. The Rockefeller Institute didn't think he would succeed. He actually shuttled his operations from the coast up to the highlands to give him 2 seasons in 1 year, so he could double the number of hybrids that he could grow in a year. And he succeeded. When he arrived in Mexico, they imported half their wheat. By 1960, Mexico was an exporter of wheat. It could feed itself on wheat. And his system, this creation of new crops, fertilized with nitrogen fertilizer from the Haber-Bosch process, and using new forms of irrigation, he always saw it as a 3-part system, went on to be reproduced for rice and for maize. And we now, rather than starving, we actually feed a population. The population did grow 8 billion, I saw this week. The population grew. We actually farm less land than we did back in 1945, because when the Soviet Union fell apart, hundreds of thousands of acres went fallow. And we produce much more food. We actually produce 1.7 times the number of calories globally for everyone on this planet, which is 8 billion versus 2.5 billion on a smaller patch of land, smaller area of land. But whatever measure you use, this is an astonishing success. It is one of the great success stories in human history. And yet, often, as happens when you have great successes, when you change things, there are unintended consequences. And one of those is simply the scale of is that a tube? No, not out here. The scale of human success and the food system that is required to feed us is hard to comprehend. One of the ways that I found that's quite useful is just to look at the biomass of all of the animals on the planet. So this is the biomass estimated in 10,000 BC of all of the wild animals, and we're talking here land, vertebrates and birds on the planet, and of people. And there are about 2.5 million people on the planet, that tiny little blue dot, outnumbered massively by the wild animals on the planet. If we take this forward to today, this is the picture that we see today. So the number of people has grown to 8 billion, huge number. The wild animals have diminished significantly, initially due to our hunting of megafauna, but even in the last, since 1970, for example, wheat yields in this country have doubled, and the population of farmland birds has reduced by 50%. This continues. Actually, the horses, sheep, and dogs, which is the little green circle at the top, weigh almost as much, animals we keep, weigh almost as much as all the wild animals. And the orange circle is the food that we grow to feed, or the meat that we grow to feed ourselves. At any point in time, the animals that we use to feed ourselves weigh twice as much as all of us, and almost 20 times as much as all of the wild animals. And the sheer scale of this system, not surprisingly, comes with consequences. So the agricultural system is by far the biggest cause of biodiversity destruction. And Tom, I'll talk about, because you're absolutely right to be worried about how that's measured. It's important, but you're absolutely right to worry about how it's measured and how carbon's measured. The food system is obviously the biggest cause of deforestation. It's the biggest cause of the clearing of aquatic life in the oceans. It's the biggest cause of fresh water shortage, although you wouldn't think it today. And it's the biggest cause of freshwater pollution. And with energy, it is the second biggest cause of climate change. And in fact, the agricultural system risks being the thing that destroys itself in that respect. So if you look, and Judith referred to this very briefly, but one of the most terrifying pictures that we came across when doing the work for the National Food Strategy were projections by the UN and by NASA about what climate change would do to productivity in different parts of the planet. And that looks like this. And obviously, these are projections, but what they believe is that notwithstanding the floods and droughts, wheat in the northern hemisphere, the green, broadly speaking, the green area, is going to become more productive because those areas are going to be warmer and there'll be more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which will assist wheat growth. Rice and maize in the southern hemisphere are going to become less productive. And in fact, sometimes that might be not a slow change, but a catastrophic change. So, for example, if you look at Vietnam, which is the world's second biggest rice exporter, 50% of its rice is grown in the Mekong Delta, and if sea levels rise a metre, 50% of the Mekong Delta is going to be underwater. So some of these changes to food production could come hard and fast. So the question then is, what do we do about this? Are we just too successful? We have just taken up too many resources to feed ourselves, and some form of catastrophe is inevitable? Well, the answer is actually no. What you have to realise is that what we were all doing, what the government was getting farmers to do during the war, as it told them to grub up hedges, what we were doing was we were focusing on producing food which was high yielding. The most important thing was cheap, high yielding food, get enough calories to feed the population. We now have to ask ourselves the question, is it possible to create enough food, but do so while sequestering carbon and restoring nature, natural capital and biodiversity. So can you do all those three things? And the answer is, it is possible. The maths, the equation, you can solve the equation. One of the reasons you can solve the equation is that the areas of land that are suitable for biodiversity restoration and carbon sequestration often overlap, and they often are in areas, 20% of the land that we use, for example, in this country produces only 3% of our calories. So they are often in areas where you're not going to devastate calorie production by putting more nature or carbon sequestration into the land. But you need to get the incentives and the models right. It is completely unfair that farmers are criticised for the damage that the food system does. You are stuck, completely stuck. I mean, some try and, it's really interesting, this, fighting out because you see the price of fertiliser going up, and so you're thinking, you're realising how stuck you are. But basically, you have been paid £3.5 billion in this country a year in the Common Agricultural Payments to farm in a certain way, to do certain things. You're highly regulated. It is, I would say, it is actually impossible. It is impossible for farmers on their own to farm in the way that they want to do. And I think that is why many people now feel helpless, because they're being told this is where they have to go, but they've got no idea what's coming from government. They can't see what the future is. And so you're sitting there thinking, do I go early and I look like an idiot? Do I go late? What is happening? So I want to talk about what needs to happen. And obviously, I have no power to make sure this happens. I want to talk about what needs to happen and then what might happen. So if you look at the land that we have in the UK, and what I say actually works more or less for Northern Hemisphere developed countries with similar climates to us, developed countries, you can see, you could take a land use map where you take some of the land out, not very much, areas, for example, near me, in Devon, on Dartmoor, you take it largely out of production altogether. You focus on Dartmoor restoring the peach, take off more sheep, you plant trees. It is, Dartmoor, actually a bit of a wilderness and could have a lot more carbon sequestration, have a lot more biodiversity without reducing the food production very much. You then have, interestingly, actually, you need to have a range of different farming techniques. So often people talk about, is it land sparing or land sharing? And you have this debate. So there will be, the land sharers will be people like Patrick Holden at the Sustainable Food Trust, who will say all land needs to be agroecologically farmed. There is no room for modern farming techniques. Everything needs to be in a rotation with ruminants. We will produce less of certain kinds of foods, but we will feed ourselves, and that will be the friendly way to do it. That, unfortunately, doesn't work for two reasons. First of all, there are actually different ecosystems. So there are ecosystems that have evolved to live on farms, and we need to protect those, but there are also ecosystems that evolve to live in wilder landscapes. And if you go all agroecological, your farming becomes extensive, but therefore takes up even more land than it does today. At the other end, you have the higher yielding but lower input farms, and I think that is where some of the stuff that Tom talked about is going to be absolutely critical, which is you're going to find people combining modern science with ancient wisdom. So the combination of understanding your soil, cover cropping, rotating, but also precision application of fertilizers, non-fossil fuel-based fertilizers, AI, plant-by-plant treatment of fields, and so on and so forth. And you could see a future that actually does that, where you have this array of different land use, and it feeds us, and it is rich in nature, and it sequesters enough carbon. But you can only do that if the government is really serious about how it creates the incentives. This, at the moment, is how we feed ourselves. So this chart shows all of the area of land in the UK that we use to feed ourselves. It's actually significantly larger, because the bit on the right is land abroad that is used either to produce animal feed to feed to us, or directly vegetables from Spain and so forth. And what you see is, at the moment, you have a huge amount of area about 85% of the area of land used to feed us is used either to graze animals or to grow feed to feed to animals. And then you have cereals at the bottom, very small number of orchards at the top right, significantly smaller than the area of golf courses up in the Shetlands. The government needs to, as a matter of urgency, look at our land in a detailed fashion and then design the environmental land management schemes and the regulation so that it doesn't repeat some of the problems of the past where you are paid to do stupid things on your land that go against the grain. And part of that is going to have to be a local approach, because the land strategy or the land use framework in Devon is going to be different from Sussex, is going to be different from East Anglia. It's a very difficult thing to do, but it is possible. One of the, if you go on Twitter, is anyone here on Twitter? Very sensible room. If you go on Twitter, you see this. I talked about the kind of difference between land sparing and land sharing and how that is a fight. All of these debates are becoming increasingly polarized. And the amount of sensible engagement between, as I see it, the environmental NGOs, the NFU, the farming bodies, the government, is falling apart. There was a wonderful book called The Wizard of the Prophet, which was one of the first books I read when I was trying to understand the food system, by Charles C. Mann. And he tracks the life of Norman Borlaug and an environmentalist called John Vogt. And he looks at their lives side by side. And basically, they were trying to solve the same problem. They were trying to solve the problem of food production. But one of them was taking the environmental way, and one of them was taking the scientific way. And they became adversaries in the public space. And Mann writes about these wizards and these prophets, the tribes that they created. And he says, wizards view the prophets' emphasis on cutting back as intellectually dishonest, indifferent to the poor, even racist, because most of the world's hungry and non-Caucasian. Following this route, they believe, is a path towards regression, narrowness, and global poverty. In return, prophets sneer that the wizard's faith in human resourcefulness is unthinking, scientifically ignorant, even driven by greed, because remaining within ecological limits will cut into corporate profits. Following this route, they say, at best postpones an inevitable day of reckoning. It is a recipe for what activists have come to describe as ecocide. As the name-calling has escalated, conversations about the environment have increasingly become dialogues of the deaf, which might be all right if we weren't discussing the fate of our children. You as farmers are in the middle of this debate, and I hope for you that the government does the right things and enables you to create profitable, sustainable business where you feel like you're being paid and incentivized to do the right things rather than the wrong things. And I also hope that you manage in this dialogue that is going on often above your heads as if you didn't exist, that you manage to keep your heads, because if you succeed in creating this transition, you will, for the second time in our lifetimes, or in our generation, certainly my grandparents' lifetime, have saved our species. Good luck.
Right. If you have a question, make it really obvious. I have got new glasses, but they're not great. So if you want to stick your hand in the air, while you're thinking about that and we're getting a microphone ready for you and stuff, I just want to ask one quick question myself. Judith, you talked about an enabling environment. And I'm just going to take a short-term issue prompted by what's happening in the egg market at the moment, and also something Tom said. How do we have an enabling environment to give Tom the confidence to spend silly money, frankly, on fertiliser, and have the confidence that the market is going to not only cover his cost, but give him a profit as well. Because at the moment, what's happening in eggs is that they're spending all the money and they're not getting
And
the cost.
I think that's a really good question. Thank you, Charlotte. I think the challenge that we have in the way that the food system works and the way that you're rewarded for the food that you produce is that too much of it is a straightforward negotiation. And that's fine if you're negotiating in a world where everything's equal and there's a level playing field and all the various other things that we've talked about this evening. But it isn't. Our market isn't like that. And therefore we need what I would call mechanisms. And I'm looking at William now and thinking about when I was at Sainsbury's in our dairy development group, we had a cost price mechanism, not suggesting it's fit for purpose right now. We were talking about that earlier. But the point being is that between us, we agreed a mechanism that was around costs of feed, fuel and fertiliser. It was motivated mainly because of price volatility and cash flow. So that was reviewed every 3 months. And we agreed the index that we would use to reference the price of feed, fuel and fertiliser. And basically that happened every 3 months. As that calculation was done, that was communicated. That took the angst out of any kind of price increase because it is what it is. Now, I'm not suggesting that that model is perfect for now. And if I look at, I'm thinking about tomato growers right now and covered crops and what that looks like because there's a different set of factors. But the key is for any particular sector and in any particular set of circumstances, you can agree a mechanism that effectively is what I would call a fair deal. And we have got to move to more of those mechanisms. And I think, if you look at perhaps, the role of the grocery code adjudicator, and I know when all of that originally kicked off and the view was, where does that go in the supply chain and what relationships are included in that, you would argue that right now is a time that those kinds of things should be reviewed because this is not going to end anytime soon. And these things are far too important to be left down to single negotiations because that just doesn't work, never works.
Tom, what would you like?
Well, everything.
But would what Judith's talking about, would that help?
It would do, but it comes down to trust. And I was with a Tesco dairy group supplier, and I moved to Arla Care 360 only a few months ago because essentially I didn't really trust the system. I didn't trust Tesco to be doing the right thing for us. Sorry if there's anyone from Tesco here, but that's where it is. And probably any of the major multiples, really, ultimately, their profit is what they're aiming for, and it's not for sustainability. That's how I felt. Whereas with Arla, it's farmer-owned, it's a co-op. I can see what's going on, where we're headed, or hopefully where we're headed, and they're working in our interests. I just never felt that with Tesco. And I think that can be across the board, whether it's some grain merchants or what have you. How's grain coming into this country? Is it farm assured? I don't think it is. Yet we have to jump through every hoop. There needs to be a greater, some more trust built back from the industry above us, back towards us, I feel. Yes.
Yes, I think two things. One that Tom touched on is that it makes no sense to create an environmentally sound, profitable, carbon zero farming agriculture system in the UK and then do trade deals with countries that allow them to produce foods to lower standards and undercut our farmers. It's just insane. You're basically exporting those harms abroad, somewhere you can't see them, and then simultaneously destroying our farming system. Clearly, the Australia and the New Zealand deal did that. And actually, George Eustace has said that this week. I said it because I was a bit freer than him, quite a long time before that. I hope the lessons have been learned. I mean, luckily, Australia and New Zealand send a lot to China. If China have a trade war with Australia, we're in real trouble. But if they don't, it shouldn't be that problematic. But Brazil and US would. the signs are that, for example, the India deal slowing down, that we may have learned our lesson. The second thing is, I was really interested to see lone wolf on Tom's slide, because one of the things, if you compare, and if you come as an outsider and you look at the UK farming system versus Europe, is how many more cooperatives, how much more their farmers cooperate. And you are always going to have, in any system, if you have huge players negotiating with smaller players, there is a natural power imbalance there. And I hope you now see so many more farm clusters. There seems to be I've asked many farmers why this is, and there are all sorts of reasons. In the past, cooperatives didn't work in certain places, and therefore they got a bad name, lack of trust. But I do think that is an essential part of any successful farming future in this country, is farmers cooperating more and becoming more powerful versus the large negotiators that they face.
I'm sure we'll come back to trade deals and possibly to co-ops and clusters as well. Let's get a question over here. You may have to speak up because there is a gale.
So, Tom, do you think that farmers' view that we need to feed the world is clouding our judgment? Should we not simplify to focus on feeding our family first and our local community second?
No, I think we're in a fortunate position to be farming, and it's not easy, and I did say it's hard graft, but I wouldn't swap it. And it's our duty of care, I think, to produce food that can feed everybody. So just to feed our own family and our own friends, I think that's a bit unfair. We need to look at the broader picture here, because all the time we're importing food, we're taking it away from mouths that are genuinely hungry. We're not hungry in this country, but abroad they are. So I think we need to produce food for everyone in this country and export it, because apparently export markets are going to save us. So, yeah.
Should we be thinking more, Judith Henry, about being more self-sufficient, or does it not matter?
I think it does matter. And it comes back to the point Henry was making around land use and what you do with that land. And in this country, we're very good at certain things because the land we've got, the climate we've got, lends itself to that. And we should do what we're good at, right thing in the right place. But we are part of a very complicated global food system that is inextricably linked at all sorts of levels. So if you were to go back to the Eat Well guide and what we should be eating, our biggest shortfall is in fruit and veg. So we simply aren't eating enough, and that impacts fibre and all sorts of other things. Our biggest trade gap is in horticulture. So I think last time we looked at before inflation, that was approaching 10 billion. And horticulture is increasingly high-tech, and it's mainly covered crops now, apart from obviously things like top fruit and bananas. But look at a lot of soft fruit, look at a lot of leafy vegetables, so on and so forth. That could easily be produced in this country, and that is a growth opportunity. And that growth opportunity I would describe as import substitution. And that just makes good strategic sense because it doesn't need massive amounts of land. It can be brownfield sites. It can make sure that people that live in the highlands and islands can get a lot more fresh fruit and veg. And I think these small modular virtual farms would be good. Vertical farms from the James Hutton Institute are being trialled up there. And then that's good for all sorts of reasons. So genuinely, I think we could produce more food here, and I think we could do that in a way that would be, from a point of view of the UK economy, good growth opportunities for people. And I think it plays to all the strengths and the investment that we've made in agri-technologies. But that requires a strategy, both for land use and for how much food we want to import and what we want to grow here. And currently, we don't have that, and we love it.
Henry?
Was the question, should farmers literally focus on the profit of their own farms and looking after their families first because it's very difficult to do anything else? Or were you using family and friends as a metaphor for growing more in this country.
It was actually an online question which said, do you think that farmers view the need to feed the world is clouding our judgment? Should we not simplify to focus on feeding our family first and our local community second?
Well, I'm going to take that literally then, rather than the trade question. So, yes is the answer. So I think that there is very little. Clearly, if you feel that your business is going well, and you are and you have capacity to do other things, you should do them. But so many farmers, if you look at the margins in the food system, basically farming has the lowest margins across the food system, but they go bust the least as well. So you've basically got businesses with large assets that are, most of them, scraping by on tiny margins. And in that situation, it is pretty unreasonable to expect people to come out and resolve climate change, restore biodiversity, etc., etc. So my view is that while some people have got the capacity to do that, it has to be the government that changes the rules of the game to mean that the kind of farming that it takes to make the money to feed your family is the kind of farming that protects the environment and saves the rest of us from climate change and biodiversity collapse.
So earlier you said the government has to do the right things, which are...
So, I mean, the structure is there. So the right things are, broadly speaking, public money for public goods. So making sure that you are paying the 3.4 billion of cap money to farmers to do the things that make their farms more environmentally sustainable, and to do that at the right profit margin, and also to give them visibility so that they can plan. So at the moment, the first of those, they've said they'll do it, but there isn't visibility. We don't know what the profit margin is, which is quite a stressful place to be in, because you don't know if you're going to either do something that you'll be paid for down the line or do something that you won't be paid for down the line. So we need to have visibility on that. The second piece is to then regulate in such a way that the farmers who are letting the side down, none of them will be in this room, they are being held to account. And so you're getting rid of the worst cases. And then the final thing is you need to get your trade right so that you actually have protection. And if you get those three things in place, you should be able to create a farming system that would be the envy of, would show the world how you can make this transition.
How many is the government getting right at the moment?
Well, I mean, the problem is that it change all the time. So, I mean, I'm on my, you're on your 18th Secretary of State. I'm on my...
I'm a lot younger than I look.
I've only been there for 4 years, and I'm on my 4th Secretary of State, and Elizabeth is too. And so, you know, I had Michael Gove, he set out...
Public money for public goods.
He set out a direction. We then had Therese Villiers, who was there for not very long. We then had George Eustace, who got it instinctively because he was a farmer, but it was Brexit and COVID, and it was incredibly hard to fight through that. Then we had Ranald Jayawardena, and now who have we got? Therese Coffey. So 5. Oh, my fifth. And you know, so it's quite hard if you think about it. It's incredibly government. If you think about, like, if you were to run a big business and try and turn around a big business in the direction of big business, you would say, I need 3 years to do this. And that doesn't exist in politics, and it makes it very, very difficult to actually get sensible, big change done properly.
Let's get a question. Lady over here, just tell us who you are as well.
Hi, yes, Rachel Durrant, University of Sussex. I'm very interested in agroecological farming and in new entrants to farming. And I would like to know, therefore, Judith, what's the role, potentially, do you foresee for new entrants in your enabling environment? Henry, if you could talk about if there's a role for new entrants in your very clever plan. And Tom, can you find space for new entrants to farming on your farm? Thank you.
Yeah.
Judith,
I'll go first. Yeah.
Yes.
I think every sector, it doesn't matter who it is, what they're doing, needs new entrants. because you need a pipeline of young people that really have a different way of seeing the world. And I think whether it is from a policy point of view, whether it is from a practical point of view, i.e., people that are young people that are farming, we haven't enabled an environment where young people can contribute to our food system. And we've started to do it, but not in any way, excuse me, that we need to at the scale we need to. But I think there are ways to do that. Obviously, one of the biggest barriers historically has been through land ownership and access to land. But if you look at some of the new areas, and if I think about the number of startups in agri-tech type businesses, whether that's aquaponics, hydroponics, aeroponics, whatever it might be, a lot of those are people that have never farmed. They are young people that are interested in food production. They come at it from a very different angle. And in fact, we had a debate last week with Harper Adams, and we had a group of young people from Bite Back 2030 who absolutely clear on the kind of food system they wanted, and contributed to that debate in a very articulate and confident manner. And I think we just got to create the forum, and it's part of that enabling environment where young people, wherever they are in the food system, can play an active part, because I think there's so much to offer, and you are the future. So we have, if we don't embrace that now, 10 years down the track, that will be a lost opportunity and a missed opportunity, and that would be really sad. But I think there are ways to do that, definitely.
Henry?
So I think there are two structural issues, and one of them comes back to actually what I was talking about before, which is the fact that farms are very low margin on average, but don't go bust very often. So in other sectors, you get a natural churn as businesses go bust, as shops come open, as opportunities where one goes bust and another one come in. You don't get that so much in farming. And so you need to find a way of, and then you've got this other issue, which is that there are a lot of things to be said for family businesses. And actually, I would argue that there are many fewer family businesses generally in the UK than there are, say, in Germany, and it's one of the strengths of the German economy that there are family businesses, because they invest in a very different cycle from privately owned business, and they're more solid. But you've got a situation in farming where you meet a lot of farmers where actually the children don't want to go into that family business, because it's not like they're being handed the factory that produces this. It looks hard, and it maybe not be what they want. So you need to, I think, have two things. You need, first of all, to get to enable farmers to leave with dignity and grace, and that is about getting the payments right, and at the moment, delinking and ensuring that farmers can, if they want to, leave the land and do that while protecting their family finances. The second is quite a wonky thing, but it's really important, which is at the moment, it's not clear that how the new products, payments, etc., in environmental land management will work for tenant farmers. And Baroness Rock did a good report on that recently about saying, but that is where realistically, that is where the new entrants are going to come in, and the new entrants are going to be particularly interested in the new kind of farming. And if they are working within systems where they can't access that money, or where the money is just taken off by the landlord, or the landlord won't let them do certain things, then that's a problem. So I think those two structural things need to be solved.
It's a really, really tough one. So I'm not going to swerve the question, but reiterate what's been said already, that new entrants are the lifeblood of the industry. They don't have the shackles necessarily of being a fourth generation farmer, where you've always done it like this. You've got fresh ideas, you can do what you want. You're not, held back's not the right word, but yeah, you're just free of those constraints maybe. But being a tenant farmer, I have no power to personally let any land to someone else. So I would suggest go speaking to land agents, because they are working on behalf of some of these larger landlords. And land is coming up through people who are taking the retirement scheme. And there may be opportunities there, because you might not want 800 acres, but you might want 8 acres. Go and have a word with them, go and talk to them, because quite often the land agents facilitate this change. and if it depends the brief they're given by the landlords as well. But on another note, I'm sure there might be someone in the room who's got something that, if you had the right business plan, that they could help you out with. But me personally, sorry. I can't sublet.
Question here in the front. Just chap in the green top. Tell us who you are.
My name's Tom Morphew, and I run two companies, one called Full Circle Farms and one called the Garden Army. I started Full Circle Farms by collecting food waste because I worked at a place called Tesco's for a short period of time.
Other retailers are available.
Yeah. And I was disgusted about the amount of food being thrown away, and then in the car on the way home hearing about kids eating turkey twizzlers and rubbish food when I'd just seen all this fresh, amazing food being thrown in a skip. So I started my business by collecting food waste and turning it into compost to feed the land, to grow fruit and veg, to supply back to restaurants. Now we partnered up with a company called Sodexo, and we are now struggling in a way to grow our farms, partly because we can't find any more farms to go on to, but we turned over £78,000 last year off 3 acres of land. And off the back of that, we started a non-profit organisation called the Garden Army, where we support 47 people from the local community struggling with their mental and physical disabilities because of COVID and everything else. But what I'm noticing now is a lot of people coming through who want to learn about agriculture and regenerative agriculture, which I fear is going to be another new buzzword for the big corporates to use, is that when they go to college, what they're learning is this new modern way of farming. But I get the sense that what we actually need to do is go right back to an old-fashioned way of farming in order to come forward and learn from these older farmers who we are now losing. What is your experience, all of you, from this? And do you think there's a kind of an angle we can go at where we go back and we look at older agricultural practices in order to come forward and pick up where we made our mistakes and change things? For example, we use pigs to turn the land because they can't afford a tractor and a plough. So I use saddlebacks, rare breed pigs. They turn the land for me, they fertilise it, I go in behind them and plant the next lot of veg. It's a very old-fashioned way of doing things, but we operate off 3.5 acres of land. I support 47 regular volunteers, and we want to take on apprentices as well, but we can't quite afford it. But my worry is that those apprentices will go to college. My experience is most of the lads I know have gone to college, they've got the spraying licence, got in a big tractor, and now they're happy as a pig in shit.
Yeah.
6 months later, a year later, they're all massively depressed and want to take their own life because they're sitting in a tractor for 17 hours a day. And it's not this lovely farming industry we thought. And that's the dark side of the of agriculture. And I think it's something that seriously needs to be changed because these lads have got all this knowledge, but they're stuck in this tractor. And do you think that needs to change? Is that something you're experiencing, Tom, on your farm with young lads coming in at all?
Yeah, so there's about 1 million questions in there, so I'll try my best. Well done, you. Fantastic what you're doing. I think that's cracking. To your last question, in a way, the tractors. It's surprising how many people want to work with livestock, and actually, being a mixed farm, it works brilliantly because I can offer a bit of tractor work, but livestock. You need livestock on the ground. It's they're the heartbeat of a farm essentially. As fun as tractors are up in East Anglia, day in day out, it can get a bit dull. But going back to how, say, my great-grandfather may have done it, when I moved into the farmhouse, we went up in the attic and I got out some old books. And I'm from, I think it was 1915. And it's essentially regen ag, but without the data, without modern knowledge. So I wouldn't necessarily say we have to go back, but we can use the old skills, certainly, and we need to. It's all there. It's all been done for. We're not reinventing the wheel. What we are doing is, well, I went to uni. I finished in 2001, and everything I learnt there, I had to chuck out the door basically straight away because it was just not fit for purpose now, or even 15 years ago. Luckily, I didn't remember too much because I had too much fun. But You're right. There's a lot of space for this. And I'm sure if you needed more land, again, this is something that needs to be taken to the wider industry. There's plenty of landlords here. And agents, and there's some people sitting behind you I'm sure could help out as well at CLM. And we need this sort of collaboration. This is what's going to drive everything forward. I need your brains. As I say, I want to surround myself with cleverer people. So, talk to us. Come and find us.
What about this idea that you were getting at there, that actually we need to be, in a way, cleverer with the land we've got, which is what you've done. You couldn't afford a tractor, so you used a pig, that sort of thing. Is there room for that, do you think, in this enabling environment that we're going to have, these quite nichey little businesses?
I think one of the, and Tom just touched on it, one of the things around the science and data that we have enables us to be much more specific. So I always think that, one of the things that you say, what should I do here? The first thing that I would always say is, well, it depends. It depends on this, and this. And everyone glazes over because that's really complicated and boring. And I just want a straight answer. What should I do here? But of course, what we've got now with the science and the data to evidence all of that is the ability to do that without it being too onerous on us. So I think that whole point about how do you go back to some of those old practices and understand with today's science and today's data why those things worked, when they were at that moment in time, where they were at the time, and all of that. And I think I would call that using modern data and scientific techniques to optimize the best that nature has to offer. And if we can optimize the best that nature has to offer rather than trying to buck nature, as it were, that for me is much more sustainable. But that is very specific because every location is a unique combination of lots of elements. But we can do that in very, very low levels of granularity. So to your point, Charlotte, we can pinpoint very small locations where the kind of interventions that you would do would be very specific, but they would be based on traditional knowledge and years of evidence of what works in practice, but that we can now evidence with data and real science. And I think that's a really powerful combination, definitely.
Henry?
Yeah, first of all, it does sound really exciting what you're doing. I wouldn't mind talking to you, actually, because we've got a charity working in schools and we're trying to do a bit more going on schools, et cetera, so I'll give you my email afterwards. So it's... When I made the point about the wizard and the prophet, this is kind of what I was talking about. So there's a physicist called Laszlo Barabasi who made his name. He's based in Harvard, I think. He made his name on network. We're looking at the topography of the internet, actually, and identified a way in which the internet was organized that was made it vulnerable to certain attacks, and then this became big news and people fixed it. And he is big into big data, and his obsession now is what he calls the dark nutrition of food. So if you look at the Food and Drink Federation in the what's called the FDA in the States, they list as nutrients about something like 350 different chemicals. Garlic contains 2,500 different chemicals, and he is mapping them kind of using big data. And his view, what he writes about it is, he says, we have become very good at breaking nature up. We understand things at a granular level better than we ever have. But we're slightly like a child who has broken up their toy and understands every little bit of it, but has no idea how to put it back together again. And there are an infinite different ways in which you could put it back together again. And the science now, because of the computing power, is just getting to a stage where we can begin to measure and understand some of these complex systems. So whether that's the soil, the microbiome, ecosystems. And if you take an example, like AMP grazing, mob grazing, There is a big debate at the moment about can you sequester carbon using cattle, using certain forms of mob grazing. It's clearly the case that you can restore soil, but can you sequester carbon in the long term? And there are now all sorts of people worldwide, because the theory came that was how the Ukrainian soil was made, that was how the prairie was made. There are people trying to work that out because we now have the science to do that. And I think that is what you're going to see. You're going to see old wives' tales, old wisdom. Some of it won't work, but some of it will. And that's where you get that wisdom and the prophet. You'll get that combination of a respect for the complexities of nature and our limitations in understanding them, but matched with modern science. So it won't be either one or the other, it will be both.
No, I'm sorry, partly because we can't hear you. We might come back to you. Let's take some online questions, but before we do that, if you do have a question, stick your hand up so that I can make a plan of where we're going next, which is going to be over there. Right, let's get some online questions.
Lucy Barr Hamilton has asked, whose responsibility is it to ensure that those on the lowest incomes buying most food from nutrient-empty corner shops can afford to buy healthy, nutrient-rich, unprocessed food which is produced sustainably, and how do we get there?
Henry. Right. She was asking, I'm going to truncate it because it was long. How do you make sure that the people who are earning or living on the least money have access to good food that they can afford?
So it might be worth just expressing the scale of the problem. So during lockdown, Chris Whitty, who was one of the country's busier men, in his free time was giving an online lecture, series of online lectures about the harm that our diets were doing to our health. Because within the health service, they now think that type 2 diabetes alone, for example, is going to cost more to treat by 2035 than all cancers do today. So it is going to, if we don't sort out our diet, it is going to bring down the health service. And behind that, there is just the misery, the human misery of lives cut short, people not seeing their grandchildren, logistical issues. It is a nightmare. So it is a big problem. And as the question rightly put, it's a bigger problem for people in poverty. So if you're a child in poverty, you're 3 times more likely to be obese. If you live in one of the 10% of least affluent postcodes, you're going to die 7 years earlier than if you live in the most affluent. A lot of that is down to food, and you're going to live longer with sickness. If you're actually going to live less long than you did 20 years ago, it's a fucking disgrace. Sorry, excuse my language. So the question then is, whose responsibility is it to fix that? Well, the reason that it is happening is that there is, I didn't talk about this before, but there is a toxic interaction between our evolved appetites that make us seek out food that is highly calorie dense, sugary, salty, fatty, and the commercial incentive of food companies. So they sell more of that stuff. We eat more. They invest more in it. They market it more. We eat more. They invest more. And this becomes a kind of reinforcing feedback loop. It's not there are 28 different kinds of Twix in this country. That is not. We spend £3.9 billion a year on confectionery alone, and 1.9 billion pounds on all fresh fruit and vegetables. Unless you break that link, and you change the commercials, and we talked about banning advertising, about putting in place a sugar tax, etc., you are not going to solve that problem. How do you then deal with people who are in poverty for whom it is much worse? There are 2 things you need to do. First of all, you have to realise that it is poverty. So it is not a problem for the food system to solve. It is a problem of inequality in society, and that is beyond my pay grade, but that fundamentally is the problem. We are the most unequal society in this country in Western democracies. But there are things around the margins that you can do. So we recommended, basically, if you give benefits in kind to people in poverty, there is good evidence that they eat better. So you increase free school meals, you do holiday activity and food programs, giving food during the holidays, you expand Healthy Start, which gives young families in poverty and people who are pregnant, access to fresh fruit and veg, milk, etc. And you may even go to some of the social prescribing schemes that they have in the state, where actually in the food deserts that you talked about, you not only make veg more freely available, you train people, you help them. But those are interactions to make a really damaged system slightly better. They're not solving the fundamental problem.
Tom?
I was just thinking about this from the farmer angle. And it's, as Henry's alluded to, we can't solve the social problems, but we can try and get out there and help educate in primary schools. We can try and do things like that. We can start the journey for these children early doors. And that's what we do here at the Society. We help with things like that. So we've got to do that. If we don't start early, we'll soon miss the boat. So we can't produce food for any less than we can produce it. I can't produce food for nothing. It's never going to happen. But we can try and educate people. And food's not expensive, really, if you're buying the raw ingredients, which is where it goes wrong. You know, Mackie D's make their fortunes and Twix make their fortunes, but the person who grows the carrots or the price of lamb is not extortionate. So it's education, I feel, that farmers can do.
Judith?
Yeah, and I think this is such a rich question. We could talk about it forever, but the fundamental is that there are too many people living in poverty. And I think the recent stats show that 69% of households, once you take out their basic housing costs, are living the poverty line or below. And that's 4 million children in this country. And of course, you know, the first few years of life are so important that if they don't get the right food and the nutrition, at that point, they never catch up. So, you know, the rest of their lives are mapped out. And that can't be right. And there are things that do work. So to Henry's point, some of the data that I showed on those slides, one of it was around promoting fruit and veg. So during COVID, what happened with Healthy Start vouchers and free school meals was that a lot of the supermarkets used their loyalty cards, but also coupons to basically match the Healthy Start voucher. And if those customers had a loyalty card, you could then track what they were buying with those Healthy Start vouchers, the free school meal vouchers, and the top-up that was being given by the supermarkets. And what it showed was there's a disproportionate impact on the healthiness of those baskets when you give those customers incentives. And also showed that in the long term, over periods of months afterwards, those good habits stayed. So there is reason to say that for relatively small investments, you can drive the right behaviours. And all the data is there to support that. And we're talking about very small amounts of money. So I think to run that matching scheme, and then say small amount of money sounds like 2.5 million, but to all of this was in Sainsbury's, in all of the people that were bringing Healthy Start vouchers, to match the Healthy Start voucher with coupons for fruit and veg, that's all it cost. Now, you think of the cost of doing nothing is massive, as Henry's described. Just why wouldn't you do that? I think the other benefit of this is we've got all of these food banks, and don't get me wrong, it's great that we've got communities that care and are putting things in place. But the minute you start relying on food banks, you're taking people out of the normal food system. And a lot of what is in food banks isn't necessarily fresh food, it's long life food. And that doesn't mean it's bad food, but it's not fresh food. We have got to find ways to keep people in the mainstream, shopping, not feeling ostracised, stigmatised by the fact that they have got free school meal vouchers or Healthy Start vouchers. And then the other thing is, the level at which those things kick in is an unbelievably low income. So £7,400 a year income to be able to be eligible for those things. That is, I don't know anyone who could live on £7,400 a year, let alone feed a family and do all of the things that we do, which is no wonder we're in the situation we're in. But there are lots of things that we can show work in practice. We just got to do them, and we've got to do them at scale, and we need to do them quickly.
Thank you. Let's move to another question. There was a hand over here somewhere. Forgive me, I've lost you. There we go. So one over here. and then there's one over there. Thank you. So one here, and then one there.
Hello, Matt Craig from Agri Matters. Is food sustainably produced that nourishes the nation a public good?
Yeah. Tom, is food a public good?
Yes.
Somehow thought you might say that. Judith, is food a public good?
It's a basic human right, just like water is. And the fact that we don't have equal access to safe, nutritious, healthy, tasty, affordable food for all people in this country in this day and age is dreadful.
But the government says the market rewards people who grow food, and so public goods are the environment and so on, not things that the market does not reward. Is it in those terms a public good?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, what is it, 71% of the UK is farmland. Probably the same amount of freshwater extractions used for agriculture. Nature, people, food, it's all inextricably linked. And that has to be done in the public interest. And if it isn't, you get what we're seeing now is a dysfunctional marketplace.
Henry?
So I guess the question is relevant technically in terms of the Environmental Land Management Scheme, where the government said they'll pay for public goods. And the definition of a public good in that sense is something that, the reason food isn't a public good is public goods can't be excludable, i.e. you can't stop people consuming them, and they can't be, if they're consumed by one person, if they go, they're not a public good either. So fresh air, for example, is a public good because it's there for all of us. Beauty is a public good because it's there for all of us. But theoretically, food isn't a public good because if I eat a carrot, then Elizabeth can't eat it. And actually, if I've got the carrot, I can stop Elizabeth eating it by building a wall around it and keeping her out. And that is why, and I will.
My money is on Elizabeth.
So that is, and the reason that you don't pay public money to something like that is, why should the public pay me to enjoy that carrot and not the rest of you? That is strictly the reason why you don't pay for food. And actually, if you did pay for the production of food, it would in the end be a very small subsidy on the price of a global market, because the price is set globally, so it wouldn't really achieve much. However, food security, I think you could answer. So the idea of being a nation that can feed itself, that can feed its population, is a public good. And there are other things, I think, there where, you know, there's a big debate over soil, for example. So is soil a public good or not? Because you as a farmer can extract from your soil. You can leave the soil in a worse state than you found it, and thereby make more money, but leave your farm trash, and you can stop people. So there are edge conditions, I would say. So it is clearly not the case we should be subsidising the production of food. It is an insane waste of public money. But we should be creating a food system that is food secure, that produces nutritious food, etc., etc.
Okay.
Very wonkish answer.
Yeah, we've got a question there, and then we're just a little bit further down. So let's start here.
My name's Mark Lee. I farm in the National Park. Abattoir facilities across the country are getting to a critical, local abattoir facilities, they're getting to a critical situation everywhere. I mean, it's low mileage food, local food, and a big need for small farmers that everybody's talking about. There was a meeting the other day at a very pleasant brewery on a small farm towards Piddinghoe, Piltdown, and I was thinking on the way home, why can we not get the funding for it? You know, there's money out there into needs and bits and pieces. Driving home, I'm sitting in the traffic on the 27 going back towards Lewis, looking to my left, and another government department is spending 75 million on a cycle track. And yet we can't get the money for an abattoir.
How far do you have to go?
At the moment, locally, there's one about 10 miles. There's another one that's closing down, but the one that's not very far from me has got a limited life because it's been bought, the land's been bought by developers. I don't know, then we're probably looking into Hampshire or Kent. So East and West Sussex, I think, will not have a facility probably in the very near future. And I expect there's quite a few other counties like that.
Tom, is this a problem you're aware of?
Yeah. As I alluded to earlier, it's a big problem, a big worry. And Tom sat down here in front of me. You know, he's got pigs that are turning over the soil. I'm sure those pigs have piglets. And if you're going to have local food miles and do everything, you need a local abattoir. We all do. I've done box schemes, land box schemes, and kill a bullock for home and what have you. We'll be going up to Kent, Essex, Dorset, quite likely. And doesn't that go against the grain? We talk about going back to what our grandfathers, great-grandfathers did, using some of their knowledge. Well, they used to be able to kill wherever. I'm not suggesting we do that. But, you know, we've got to be realistic. We need some infrastructure here in the southeast. Otherwise, all these grand plans that, you know, we keep being told, oh, do this, reconnect, blah, blah, blah. It's very hard to when you're fighting planners the whole time. There's lots of people in the southeast who wouldn't want to see an abattoir go up in their neck of the woods. And yet we need it. It's part of the rural infrastructure.
Henry, how do we get around that?
So we argued that the government needed to find a way of enabling small abattoirs to work. There was a great piece of work done by Dieter Helm where he looked at the value to the local economy, and he showed that actually if you were to be able to price all those benefits into the abattoir, then the abattoir would pay for itself. It's not a subsidy. There are obviously issues with, you know, one of the big issues has been the increasing in animal welfare, which has made some of them, just the legislation, very difficult. I don't know how the government does that. Why it is difficult, I think, is because I think there is a general sense that it is a good thing to do, but it has never been the main problem. And so it's been rattling around inside DEFRA now for ever since I've been there. But no one has had the time or the energy to kind of grasp it by the horns. So I think politically what happens is two things. Either things get bad, and when it gets really bad, intervention happens and it recovers, or it falls away completely and people don't think it's ever possible to recover. I don't know what's going to happen. Elizabeth might have a stronger, better informed view than me, but I think it would be a great sadness, and it would be economically damaging to the country in a small way, but certainly damaging to communities if we lost them altogether, and damaging to animal welfare as well.
Yeah. And I was going to pick up on the animal welfare point, actually, because I do think, to Henry's point, things happen when things get so bad or when there are new insights. And I think one of the things that may well come out of the Food Data Transparency Partnership, and particularly the measurements on animal health and welfare, is, you know, just where the animals are versus where the animals will be slaughtered, how many miles those animals are travelling from a welfare standard, and what that data and those insights show. Because I think we don't have that. It's not, that bit of information isn't transparent. And I think when it is, that will ask some questions. And then you get back to, well, what should a national infrastructure look like for this? If here, this is where the animals are, this is where the facilities need to be, if we are to make sure that animals are being treated humanely and are not spending, and it's not just a case of miles, it's a case of time as well, because, you know, took me 3 hours to get here from central London this evening. It's 38 miles. You know,
we're not going to kill you, don't worry.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you. But the point being is that, you know, those insights are not transparent. They're not freely available, and when they are, I think that is a moment to then have a serious conversation about, is this the kind of food system that we want to have, and therefore what does that mean, particularly in the southeast?
Okay, got another question just down here at the front.
Good evening, my name's Oliver Fry. My question is, when I was speaking to the managing director of Morrison's, he said it was cheaper to take animals back up north towards Yorkshire to slaughter them, and then to bring them back down south to sell them on supermarkets. because it was cheaper for them to do that. Why is that, and why can't we as a nation have slaughterhouses down here that can do that for the same price? Because of global warming, it's not good moving the animals around, one, and also for the animals' health. Why can't we as a nation have slaughterhouses down here that can do that for the same prices to stop moving the animals round?
Thanks, Oliver. Just from a retailer's point of view, how on earth does that make sense?
Oh,
I know you can't talk for them, but...
No, I think I can talk a little bit for them. Morrison's is quite a separate setup, so they have their own integrated supply chain. So they will be producing their own animals, they have their own abattoirs, and they have their own processing plants. So that's why it makes sense for them to move those animals up there, because they own those facilities and they operate, their margin operates on basically a end-to-end margin, not the margin of each individual part of the supply chain, because it's an integrated supply chain. So that's why Morrison's would say that. But to the point we've just made, you know, we need to have facilities where facilities are needed, and that requires infrastructure planning, and we're not good at that as a nation overall.
Let's just do a quick show of hands. How many of you are confident that, say, 10 years from now, there will be something that we could call a local abattoir? Okay, are you just being shy? Maybe let's put it the other way around. How many of you think that there won't be anything local in 10 years? Wow. Okay. So Wiz has got the microphone there. How do you change that in the southeast, where you've got lots of people who live here who may or may not be keen on that? You've got a lot of people. Land is really expensive. What do you do? Lady at the back.
You go back to the old days where you used to take one animal to the butcher's, and the butcher would slaughter it while you were filling the paperwork in, and you left with the offal.
Okay, that's one idea. I'm just not running Wiz too much because she'll get cross.
I know we all hate cooperatives, but surely we've got to all start talking to each other and get a proper cooperative facility, or it just won't happen.
Okay. Sorry, you're going to have to run over here. Keep your hands waving in the air, otherwise she doesn't know where she's going.
I feel from a new entrance point of view, I think the way that you're going to kind of get that the show of hands to change is like what Tom was saying, the trust. I think there's a lack of trust and a lack of communication from the hierarchies down to the farmers, that we definitely know that there is going to be something going to be put in place, because at the moment this sad news has happened, but we don't actually know where we're going with this. We don't know what path we're taking, so we need to have that communication, so then we've got the guidance to know where we're going to be in 5-10 years time.
Okay, just carry on round. That's it. Thanks, Wiz. Stick your hands up over here so I know where to send them.
William White, NFU. Just to say there are 9 abattoirs left in the region. One is AVP, so we discount that. And they are under threat, as you heard. Woodmancote probably has 9 years left before Berkeley Homes get their way there. Farnborough looks very dodgy in terms of, you know, where it is in terms of suburbia. And I would say the main issues are regulation, labour and costs. All of those were addressed in the Small Abattoir, the Future of report, which was an all-party parliamentary group report, and government has done very little to progress any of the changes that were put forward in that very good report to try and save small abattoirs.
Okay, Wiz, I'm really sorry. You're going to have to run right the way over here.
Good name, Wiz.
Wave like mad. Thank you very much.
Just say that I work for the Prince's Countryside Fund. We also did a report on abattoirs last year, and the other thing the farms need to do is use them. We spoke to pretty much every small abattoir in the UK to find out what their problems were, and I completely agree with the NFU. It is costs, regulation, all those things, but farmers were saying they were travelling further distances as well because they slightly preferred the offering. If you don't use your local abattoir, it will close down.
Here, anyone else? While we're solving the world's problems. Start with abattoirs.
For me as a small-scale farmer, and I probably speak for a lot of farmers, I don't want to go to one massive central abattoir where my animals are going to be rushed through a system and and we talk about the animal welfare side of it, I'd rather go to a smaller abattoir where I can see my animals going, be processed calmly and properly, and then come out the other end and know I'm supporting a small-scale, family-run abattoir. And then the other side of that is, if no one wants one of these abattoirs on their doorstep and we're going to struggle to build them down here, then isn't that more of an incentive to keep the ones we've got, where the neighbours are used to that abattoir being there, instead of allowing people like Berkeley Homes to get their hands on that land? And the government can the government put support in there to shore them up as a subsidy to make sure they can continue working and supplying local farmers with one-to-one kind of basis on small-scale abattoir systems.
Oh, and the lady just behind in a white top.
Hello. I think a lot of the issues that have been discussed sort of come down to the economics of it. It all comes down to what contract are you going to get. You're going to get a better price going to a larger abattoir. You're going to get a better price going to a mill up in Lancashire, was it, that you mentioned earlier?
Oh, Lincolnshire.
Yeah, Lincolnshire for your grain. Everything sort of comes down to the economics of post-farm gate, and it's that disconnect. Post-farm gate and between that time and consumers and the retailers setting the contracts, I think that's causing a big issue with how farmers can actually produce food that's cost effective.
How powerful are the retailers in all this? Because retailers don't really want small volumes of things from local abattoirs, do they?
No, but just to go to the contract point, most retailers don't have contracts with farmers. Retailers have contracts with manufacturers and processors that you will all know. And the Sainsbury's Dairy Development Group that I talked about is rare that a supermarket will dictate the price a processor or a manufacturer pays to a farmer. And that comes back to the whole transparency of the money flows in the value chain. So the point I made about connected business cases is unless you have absolute transparency of what costs what and where in the supply chain, then understanding what a fair deal looks like and where the money goes will always be impossible. And I think if there is one thing that comes out of this cost of living crisis, has got to be that transparency around those money flows in a way that isn't commercially sensitive, because that's always the big argument. It's commercially sensitive information, so we can't tell you. But you can. And if you've got long-term relationships, because the other challenge with all of this is the short-termism of things. So if you can buy something cheaper, you go somewhere else, because everybody wants price cuts and everybody wants affordable food, which comes back to the poverty point. Then, you know, it just drives all the wrong behaviours, that short-termism. You want long-term contracts, you want certainty of volume, and you want pricing mechanisms that operate that fair deal. And to do that, you need transparency. And that is the crux of the problem.
Henry,
and sorry, one further point on that. And I, because I've worked in this industry for years, I kind of know it. When we had family businesses, and when I first started in retail, it was Marks and Spencer, and it was the Seifs and the Sackers. And then I went to Safeway. They bought by Morrison's, and it was the Morrison's, and it was Ken Morrison, and it was his business. He knew that business inside out, and it was a family business, and he took a long-term view. And when I joined Sainsbury's, the Sainsbury's family were big shareholders in their own family business and took a long-term view on things. You look at the ownership now of the food system in this country and the length of tenure of the leaders of some of those companies, and I'm not just talking about retailers, but it's more generally, it's very difficult to see when the average life cycle is less than 3 years that you ever get a long-term plan on these things. And that is a material change in the last 20 years. And I just think we have to do something about it.
Henry, I just wanted to pick up on something that the NFU chap, I'm sorry I didn't forget your name, sitting over there pointed out, that lots of the things that people came up with in the room were in a report, which was done and was discussed and then disappeared. into DEFRA? What happens to all of that?
Well, I think that's the point I made, which is in the last 4 years, shortly after I arrived, we had Brexit. We were marched up the hill to 3 potential no-deal exits and marched back down again. We then quite quickly had COVID. Then we had Ukraine. We've had 5 secretaries of state, and goodness knows how many ministers. I saw something in the last year, 80 government ministers and junior ministers have resigned or left government in the last year. And in that environment, you have to be, there's only a certain amount of bandwidth to get things done. And this has just been something that has been rattling around with everyone thinking it's a good thing to do, and no one's picked it up and run with it. And it takes a group of a minister and a good group of civil servants to push something like this over the line. It just hasn't been pushed over the line. Again, Elizabeth might have a different view. She's closer to it than me. But
I agree completely with
Just for those of you who can't hear her, hang on.
No, I completely agree with Henry's analysis. What I would say is that where these abattoirs close and the power of the noise around where they close can be quite significant. Now, since Tottingworth closed, there's been a lot of work done by local people to try to raise awareness of this. And some of us are having conversations and meetings with the right people, I hope, quite soon to talk about it. You get a tipping point sometimes, and no one quite knows why that tipping point can exist. But in the southeast of England, we've got an awful lot of very influential Tory MPs. We've got a very vocal and articulate group of farmers and a very good media. And I suspect if we really, really work together and work very hard, maybe this could be the tipping point. It's a very, very difficult thing to solve for all the reasons everyone has described. Finding land, neighbours who will accept it, and all the other stuff that goes with it. So I just think maybe we can make this the tipping point. Maybe Tottingworth can be the thing that can make the difference. And I'm forever optimistic. So I think we should just rally to the cause. And when you are asked to write to your MP, it sounds silly. Does it matter? Yes, it does. It really matters. It annoys the hell out of them. Because if you annoy them, then they have to take it seriously. Then they have to tell the minister. And then the minister has to answer that. And then the civil servant has to talk to the minister. And then think we need to actually address this thing. So use the political democratic system. You voted for these people. Use it. And let's see if we can make a difference.
Thank you. More questions? Have we got any more online ones? Nope. Any more for any more? Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Chris Appleton. I'm a dairy farmer. I may be wrong, but I think somebody mentioned that we were producing 1.7 times the number of calories that we need to, for the world to survive. Surely that means that there is a significant amount of land that potentially could be taken out of production to focus on carbon sequestration, biodiversity, net gain, etc., etc. But is the answer to all of this not, let's stop bloody wasting it?
Yeah. Wasted food, Judith.
Yeah, absolutely right. Most businesses now globally are signed up to a UN Sustainable Development Goal 12.3, which is to halve food waste by 2030. Again, it comes back to the answers to that aren't the same. It depends where you are in the world, where that food is lost. So in this country, most of it is post-consumer, so post-retail, so it's in consumers' homes. The good thing about the cost of living crisis is exactly what happened in 2008, is that people stopped wasting food because they have, the cost of it. In other parts of the world, it is upstream, so it is post-farm gates, and that could be for all sorts of reasons. And if you look at somewhere like India, they've invested huge sums of money into creating, I think it was 150 local processing hubs to basically stop food rotting before it can get to consumers. So they're not simple answers, but I think it's the one area, and it is the one area where we've got a global reporting standard on food waste, which is unusual. And indeed, it's something we recently had a consultation of in this country around mandatory food waste reporting. but it's probably one of the areas where we are making more progress. Are we making enough progress? No, but better than we were.
As a producer, it's the most frustrating thing, because it's bloody hard work making it, and for it to be wasted is just such a tragic. It's a loss, really. It really is. So how do we stop it? Again, it's education. I think we need to get into schools and educate people how much hard work and how much time and energy goes into producing food. If people realised what happens, they might respect it a bit more. I think food has been far too cheap. That's maybe not the right phrase. It's been readily easy to buy, and the shops have been full of food all the time. And I think people have lost respect for food. So if they respected it more, they might hold on to it more and use it and eat it and not waste it.
Yes, so we argued that you needed to reduce waste, but you need to expand your definition of what that waste is. And I think there are 3 areas where we need to be more thrifty. The first is we need to throw less of that food away, that 30%. The second is the difference in productivity on farms, even farms doing similar things on similar soil, is huge, and it's often the least productive farms that are also the most environmentally damaging, and we need to really think about how we can use the land better by improving productivity in farming systems. And then the third is we need to stop feeding so much of the food that we produce to animals, and we need a bit of the land that animals graze. I know that's not popular, but you saw from the chart at the beginning, if I would say to you, is that the perfect amount of meat? You know, do we happen to have settled upon the perfect amount of meat? Actually, if you reduce that huge orange ball by about 30%, you'd take an enormous amount of pressure off the land, and you would also still would be able to, you know, it wouldn't be a huge change in diets. In fact, we reckoned with our calculation that even with a 30% reduction in meat eating, 55% of our land would still be pasture. So I think farmers just need to realise that when we say we need to eat a little less meat, that doesn't mean that the ceiling's going to fall in and everything's going to change and we all hate animals.
Of course you can.
But there's meat and there's meat, and I bet you find a lot of that large increase would be white meat, would be pigs and poultry.
You saw it. There's a lot of pigs and poultry, a lot of beef too, a lot of beef, feedlot beef.
Feedlot beef in which country?
But in America, although you still need to. So feedlot beef is pretty horrific in my view, but it is lower carbon. There is still a bit too much pasture in this. If you look around me in Devon, for example, we have hillside and hillside of very nitrogen covered grass with a lot of nitrogen, bright green grass being grazed to produce not very much meat. And you could take some of that land and sequester carbon it, restore biodiversity without reducing food production by very much. And that would be a better use of some of that land.
Yeah.
And I get my question is, the question is, do you think we happen to have stumbled on exactly the right amount, or is it possible that maybe we should have a little less?
You've got to ask the question, why are people still doing that? It's because...
Paid to.
Well, we don't know what the alternative is. It's such pie in the sky, we don't know where we're going.
Yeah, you don't exactly. You can't do that. You can't suddenly make everyone eat less meat and turn a revenue stream into a non-revenue stream. It's not on your...
Sorry.
Sorry.
Run towards the waving man, Wes. Keep waving. Thank you. Just briefly, if you can, thank you.
Yeah, just quickly, obviously we're going on about production and things like that. It's kind of mainly towards Judith, maybe Tom, you could kind of, from a farmer's point of view, a lot of supermarkets are starting to do it, but why, when we talk about waste and stuff, why is in some of that waste the misshapen vegetables, the things that aren't up to the supermarket standards? Why can't we have a misshapen vegetable in a supermarket? Like, what is that kind of a bad thing to kind of try and get more people to eat vegetables and fruits, or?
Thank you. Judith, wonky veg.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think every retailer does have what they would call a wonky veg kind of offer, which is at the price sensitive end of things. We don't grow a lot of wonky veg. I think it's a bit of a misnomer. And if you look at what gets graded in and out, because we've become very good at producing very uniform crops, I don't have any evidence that suggests it's the big issue that people think it is. The other route for that, of course, is into processing, and the crops that the manufacturers that can take those crops and process them into something that, I mean, if you look at people like Ruby's in the rubble, they would be using all those kinds of things, and they've set their brand up to do that. So I think the issue isn't whether it's wonky or not. The issue is the mismatch between supply and demand on fresh produce. So if you look on average at supply side, 15 years of production, and you look at the same 15 years of demand side, and you can take, it's been done on things like celery and salad crops, and it's been done on soft fruit, things that are quite vulnerable from a weather point of view, because if the sun shines, everybody wants strawberries and soft fruit, and if the sun doesn't shine, they don't, and that fruit isn't going to last very long. The mismatch between supply and demand on average is around 30%. So one of the key things we need to get to, and that's why vertical farming is so interesting for some of that short life, very vulnerable product, like soft fruit, like leafy crops, is that you can almost grow on demand, because the growing cycle of those things goes from something like 40 days to 20 days. You can speed the crop up or you can slow it down. If you've got the weather forecast coming and you know what that's going to look like, suddenly that 30% mismatch between supply and demand at any given time is 5%, 10%. And those are the kind of things we need to be thinking about.
I'm going to move on. Let's get some questions online, and then there's a chap over there. So let's do the online ones first.
Okay. What are the most critical leverage points for changing the farming and food system that we should be focusing on?
So that was the critical leverage points for change in farming and food. Henry.
So I've mentioned them. I think there are two really critical things we need to fix, two feedback loops that are going wrong. One is, I talked about the junk food cycle, which is the fact that you have this interaction between appetite and commercial incentive companies, and that causes problems, and we need to break it. The other, in the nature side, is what Partha Dasgupta, the economist, called the invisibility of nature in his Economics of Biodiversity report for the Treasury. And he pointed out the bleeding obvious, which is in all the systems that we use to measure human success, we don't value nature in any way, so you can't count it in your wallet. It's not in the P&L or the balance sheets of companies. We don't measure it in GDP. And in fact, he says that we actually subsidize globally to the tune of $500 billion a year activities that destroy nature. So on the farming side, you need to start building in form of payments, in the form of taxes. You need to build nature, and to Judith's point about how you can start to deal into the cost of things. And when you start doing that, the system will right itself.
Judith.
Well, I was going to say exactly the same thing around the business case for this, and that the business case needs to be the full business case. And I think the other thing is that we just need to deal with poverty, because that will help a lot with some of the things that we've talked about in terms of the affordability of food, or the perceived affordability of food, and all the other things that come with poverty.
Tom.
I just want to pick up one of Henry's points that I think there's a lot of farmers in here who love seeing nature on their farms, and actually, I don't want to do us out of any money here, but if we weren't paid, we'd probably still do it anyway. Because I have great pleasure wandering around and seeing hares, skylarks, corn buntings. Not that I can really see them half the time because they move so quickly. But the fact is, everything that everyone talks about seems to be money. And actually, there's far more to it than that. Sometimes we've got to have a bit of... I'm trying to find the right phrase here. Passion is not in short supply in this room, I don't think. But we need... everything just goes back, seems to be, to a policy and money. And I think we need to look beyond that sometimes. And actually, we can create things on our farms that are good for us. And if they're good for us, they're going to be good for other people. I'm really worried I'm talking ourselves out of money here. but we still need to be supported. And how we square this circle, I don't quite know. That's why I'm not in DEFRA and Henry is.
Okay, there's another question over here.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel Durrant from the University of Sussex again. I feel like you're talking about monetising things and that being a big key. But the next thought in my mind is how the financialisation of so much of the economy and so much of our public life has been playing out, and not necessarily for the better of the good of the most of us. And then I was also thinking about the converse of the poverty problem is the new squirearchy and the golf courses and the mega mansions, and is that actually something that we also need to tackle? And it's certainly a problem for new entrants, but it's a problem for a lot of farmers wanting to retain land or increase the amount of land that they can farm. I speak as a non-farmer myself, but is that something that you think is a relevant problem in this conversation?
Henry?
I can talk about the first piece, which is, so I think that Partha Dasgupta was, and the idea of natural capital is slightly unfairly attacked on those grounds. So what he says is, basically what he's saying is, if you allow people to make money out of destroying nature, or pay them to destroy nature, you cannot be surprised if they destroy nature. Then he says, how do you stop that happening? And he actually recognises there are a number of different ways of doing that. So he talks about some nature as you just have to agree is sacred or is untouchable, there is no price on it. He talks about, it is absolutely fine to have exclusions, bans, etc. And that is one way of regulating it. That might be appropriate in certain situations. In other situations, for example, a carbon price of nitrogen, it actually might make sense to put a price in, gradually increase it over time to force the market to look at less destructive ways of doing it. So I think just because you say at the moment people are being allowed to make money out of destroying something and we need to recognise that financial problem doesn't necessarily mean that you're putting, the price of everything and the cost of everything, the price of whichever it was that Edwina Curry said, I can't remember, or was said to Edwina Curry. So I think you had to be careful, but I don't think the existence of natural capital necessarily means that you're putting a price to everything in that way.
I'd just like to pick up on the pressure on land use in the southeast, which is there is a lot of money that comes into the area. We all know that trying to buy a house or even a cottage or a bungalow in the southeast as a farm worker or as a farmer is nigh on impossible. It's not. We can't produce money in the southeast from farming to compete with other industries. So when you talk about monetarising the squirearchy, we've all got that battle. It's not easy, and one person's vision of landscape use is very different than someone else's. So the only way we can get to find out what's going on is to talk to each other. And it's very interesting to hear some of the ideas that have come from the floor tonight. But if it stops now, we've gained nothing. So we need to keep talking to find out what people's visions are. Because I just imagine, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but the vision of some parts of Brighton are very different to some parts of on top of the South Downs. And there's a vision I know that Brighton Corporation have, and I know it's a challenge for some of their farmers who are represented here tonight. And there needs to be a good discussion to realise that what we can produce on the South Downs, I've got to talk about the South Downs, that's where I'm from, will not tick every box, but you need to let some production happen as well.
Judith?
Yeah, and this is incredibly complicated, but I think there's something in all of this that is about what does society value. We talked about public money for public goods and whether food is a public good, but the way food is produced is a public good because of all the things that we've talked about. And therefore, all of you are in some ways public servants. And there is nothing better than if you're a public servant and you're providing public goods or protecting public goods, than your public appreciate what you do. there's no greater reward. And perhaps it's that the words you were looking for, that around purpose and meaning to the way food is produced. And I think, again, an earlier comment about if people really knew what goes into this, the thought, the care, the passion, the commitment, the hours, the angst, all of those things, then actually the things that we've just talked about and some of those challenges and trade-offs and prioritisation of money versus something bigger and a bigger idea would be possible. So for me, the question is, how do we lay bare the efforts of all the people in this room and the people all over this country that are providing these public goods, so that the public can value and appreciate them beyond the pounds? Because I think that's the fundamental challenge here.
Okay, we're going to take a last question. If I can ask everyone to answer it in a brief fashion, that would be marvellous.
I think this comes quite timely after what Judith just said. And my question is, why isn't food, farming and cookery part of the national curriculum? It would tackle food waste, the health crisis, and also... I had a final point, but I can't remember what that one was, sorry.
Everything, pretty much.
And new entrants.
And new entrants. Yeah, of course, it would make farming seem a thing you could go and do. You go into schools, don't you? But not officially.
Only to drop the kids off at school at the moment.
Would it help if your kids were learning and all their friends were learning about farming?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a no-brainer, and it's there's people in this audience who've been on the education committee here for a long time, and it's a drum they've banged long and hard, and we still need to keep doing that.
Judith?
Yeah, definitely. I think things like Farmer Time that Leaf set up, just brilliant. I do think schools get bombarded with lots of information from different groups. So one of the things I'm involved with is the British Nutrition Foundation. We have Food Fact of Life. There are lots of other programmes. Finding single channels, which could be, a school's food channel, for all of these different parties who are offering different insights on different parts of the food system, could help. There is policy around school food and what should be in the curriculum. I don't think that policy is implemented. And it comes back to, you can have great policies, but unless they're happening in practice, then it's meaningless.
Henry?
Yes, it is in the curriculum. It's every child up to the age of 14 officially has to learn where food comes from, seasonality, to cook a range of savoury dishes, to learn that food is one of the great creative endeavours in life, and to learn a love of cooking. And I know so much about it because I wrote the curriculum, and it's been there since 2014, and it isn't happening in so many schools I go into, because passing a law doesn't make things happen. It is sufficient. It is necessary, but not sufficient. And actually, we need school by school to go in and make them do it. But it's absolutely critical, and it's on the curriculum, and it's not happening.
And there, I'm afraid we have to leave it because time has beaten us. Can I thank you all very much indeed for your questions? And can I now call upon your president, Elizabeth Buchanan?
Just a reflection, actually. Our wonderful priest at Harvest Festival said to us, what we need to do is to reintroduce the saying of grace before we eat, because it makes people stop and think about where that food came from and the effort that was put into producing it. Just a thought to go away with. I've actually thought if I had the phone number for Rishi Sunak, I might give him a call and say, I've actually found the perfect team for DEFRA right here, now. Wisdom, the collective wisdom that we've heard.
I've got Liz Truss's phone number.
Yeah, great. Maybe not. It has been the most extraordinary evening. I really have never been to a conference where I've heard such extraordinary wisdom and thoughtfulness. It's been thought-provoking, it's been challenging, and actually, to a degree, also encouraging. I'm thrilled that we've got the Sussex YFCs here, so strongly represented, because they are the future, and we have them here, and they're sharing in this conversation, and that really matters a lot. I also, before I say another word, want to thank the South of England team, the wonderful Wiz, and the wonderful Sarah, who just make everything happen at this place. I think they just do everything at the South of England Agricultural Society. Whatever you do, they're there at the heart of it. Nothing could happen without them, so endless thanks to them, as ever. So a few thoughts. To Charlotte, I just want to say to you, such enormous thanks, not just for comparing once again our conference, but for all you do through the BBC to bring farming to the attention of the wider public and increase that very public appreciation that we've all been talking about today. Charlotte is doing it day in and day out for us, and people whinge like hell about Countryfile, etc. Stop whinging. It's not about you. It's not for you. It is for the people we want to appreciate the food and all the effort that's going into this. So thank God for Charlotte, is what I would say. Her knowledge, her enthusiasm, her humanity are of infinite value to agriculture, and on behalf of everyone who cares about the future of rural Britain, I just want to say a very heartfelt thanks to you.
Thank you.
And now, if I may, to Tom, who is a fellow Sussex farmer. And I wanted to say how good it was to hear a real farmer explaining what it's like at the sharp end, and also that passion and that love. I'm like you, I'm never happier than when I'm on the farm. I just want to be out in those fields and with the cattle and seeing nature all about me. That's what gives me a thrill. That's what gets me up in the morning. And to hear that from Tom was terrific. But I want to pay tribute to Tom and his whole family. The Gribbles are an institution in East Sussex. They are a remarkable 4th century farming family who believe passionately, as you've heard this evening, about farming in harmony with their beautiful downland landscape. But their contribution, like so many people in this room, their contribution goes way beyond their farm gate. They're always giving back to the farming community, whether it's here at the South of England Society, where Tom is a trustee and a cattle steward, or the Lawton and District Agricultural Society, where Tom's father, Ed, is a linchpin. It's people like this, like you, who are the backbone of our countryside. Tom's family and what they do and what they represent are deeply important to the future of this country, not just in terms of the fabulous food they produce, but the contribution they make to the social fabric of rural Britain. The clue is in the name, agriculture. It really matters, those two bits together. Now to Judith, to whom I've been very fortunate to have known for many years, I want to ask a question. What is it like to be a legend in your own lifetime? She strides like a colossus across the food, environment, and agriculture firmament, and even the rugby world too, let it be known. When she sleeps, I haven't a clue. But what I do know is that organisations from the Royal Botanic Gardens to the Environment Agency to the Food and Farming Commission benefit enormously from her lifetime's experience and wisdom, and we saw that tonight. Phenomenal. And now to Henry. I didn't know I was going to embark on a carrot war with Henry, but so be it. Carrots at dawn it will be. But I've worked with Henry for 5 years, whatever it is, at DEFRA now. And it has been a joy and a privilege to get to know Henry better. And I want to say a massive thank you for your eloquence, your courage, and your determination. You heard just a little bit there what Henry's done beforehand. You know, he's done the school food curriculum. He has been enormously influential in this space. Frankly, simply and only out of the goodness of his heart, trying to put something back. The National Food Strategy is one of the most important pieces of work ever produced for government. We may still be waiting on how they're ever going to respond to this, but it is there, and it creates a rallying point for all of us. And I want to say something else about Henry. Many of you will not realise how brave it was of him to speak up against the Australian and New Zealand trade deals. He's done it again and again. And they were, by the way, an utter disgrace. But he did it because of his firm belief in the importance of treating animals with respect and kindness. And he did it despite the risk of being defenestrated from his role at DEFRA. And it, to me, is so affirming in this day and age to see people in public life who are prepared to stand up for what they believe in. I think it's called leadership, but we haven't seen much of it recently. And by the way, what he did on that trade deal and the influence he's brought to bear has helped every farmer in this country.
every one of us. And we all owe him a huge debt. And he may have not stopped those trade deals, but his interjections and those of George Eustace this week will, I pray, help stop all such future mistakes. So thank you, Henry, for that and so much more. Now, finally, as this is almost my last presidential turn, I want to say something what I think about the future of agriculture. It'll be very brief, I promise you. I could have gone on for everything everyone said tonight. I had so much I wanted to say. We are going through such a massive shift now in how we farm. These are really alarming days, not just because government policy isn't yet certain, but many other challenges too: climate change, diseases, rising input costs, trade deals, trying to understand the monetizing of carbon and biodiversity and so much more. It's bewildering and it's frightening. And it's particularly so for small-scale family farmers. And by the way, not just in the UK, it's small farmers everywhere. And I particularly feel for the tenant farmer sector, and I'm so glad that Henry talked about that and that we have Tom here representing that sector. The small family farms matter so much. We absolutely must ensure that their essential contribution to growing food and enhancing nature is properly recognised. They must have a fair part and a key part in the transition to the sustainable future we all want to see. If we lose them, we lose something of such incalculable value that we cannot magic back once we realise what we've lost. It's like the toys, we're breaking it all up and we won't be able to put it back together. Once they're gone, they're gone. The impact of that on culture, on land management, and on landscape would be irreversible. In other countries, there's great effort made to protect tribes who have been, kept away from the modern world because what they're doing, they're living off the land or they're living in a very special way, whether it's the tribes of the Amazon or wherever. To me, country people, you are like that. You are incredibly precious and important. You don't want to go and live in a city. You would die if you went to live in it. You wouldn't know what to do, most of you. I would. I mean, I loathe the place. You need to be here. You need to be caring for the land. You need to be looking after. You need all that wisdom and skill and experience that you have. It's so precious. And the relationships, there's a sort of an interconnectedness between you all. And it's what rests, our country rests on this. We cannot lose it. But do we have to change? You bet we do. It really wasn't that long ago that nature was thriving while we farmed. We have made some cataclysmic mistakes, but as has been said this evening by everybody, we didn't do it on purpose. We were kind of told to do it. Now we know better, and we're learning all the time. We're learning the wisdom of Tom's great-grandfather, the best of the old and the best of the new, not least how to increase yields without destroying the soil on which we all depend. And it's why I'm particularly so proud of the work of the Prince's Countryside Fund, of which I am a trustee. And we have two people here who've come down from London to be here today, which I'm really thrilled about. And the Society has been so supportive this year of the fund. But helping farmers through this transition is what we're all about. We're giving the farmers the tools and confidence to meet the rapid change to the sort of farming system our planet demands. Importantly, the work of the fund also gives that much-needed thing, hope. And if anybody wants to talk to the team, they're right here. We run the most wonderful workshops, etc., to give people the skills they need. I absolutely do believe that there are huge opportunities to be had. I am an optimist. We have to get ourselves, however, from here to there and not lose people on the way. And that isn't going to be easy. So each of us must look out for those who are struggling, who need a helping hand or a friendly ear. Each of us must be like Henry and Tom and Judith and Charlotte and speak up for what we believe in, for our community and for our friends and for what we do. We need to find common ground wherever we can with all those who have an interest in the future of farming, food and the environment. Let's do all we can to stop the dialogue of the deaf. Together, I pray we can all thrive by creating a world in which we produce the highest quality food for which we are properly and fairly paid, which is accessible to everyone, where the care of animals is paramount and our natural world is abundant and healthy. This must not be a dream, but an achievable reality. Thank you to our 4 terrific speakers for leading the way to help us find that future. Thank you.
Now, I'm pretty sure your noses, like mine, can tell that the food is ready, but I'm just going to ask you to stay put for just a moment and welcome Jeff Burgess, President of the Royal Smithfield Club, who would like to say a few words. Jeff.
Charlotte, thank you. And also thank you to the whole of the South of England Society for letting us come and say a few words. It's been fascinating listening to all the conversations tonight and the presentations. The Smithfield Forum, the Smithfield Club is supporting this in every way it can. We no longer have a show, but we still have a strong voice and we're trying to use it as much as we can in support of livestock farming. But today I'm here to talk about an annual presentation that we make. We have the Bicentenary Trophy, which was set up in 1998, celebrating our bicentenary, and it's a trophy that's given each year to somebody who is voted amongst an independent panel to have made a major contribution, not just in one year, but in all their contribution to agriculture over the years. And the award to the 2022-23 person, that person is sitting in this room. I'm not going to try and talk about that person in detail, but I think the best way is if I may read out the citation that was sent to us in the nomination. We received between 10 and 15 nominations each year from around the country for people in farming or associated with farming, right through from research through to the retailers. This particular citation talks about the person that has been put forward. It says, this person has has achieved in her lifetime far more than most, not least in serving our industry. She has played a massive part in pulling us all together and fighting for what we believe is the UK's most important industry. The depth of knowledge of things in agriculture are staggering, and the list of high-profile contacts are endless, and these are used with great aplomb to get a message across on behalf of us all. The person is very fair-minded, with a strong sense of injustice, and when it occurs, is a formidable negotiator who does not suffer fools gladly. Woe beside anybody who locks horns with her without arming themselves with the correct facts first. She uses this trait to fight for our industry and the people involved in agribusiness like no other person. And if she manages to do all this off the radar, and few people will be aware of the work that has been done over the years and the actions that have been taken. It is often accomplished on her own, and in so doing, often achieves more individually than any collection of trade bodies. I can say that the nominations that were put forward this year, the panel unanimously voted for the award to go to one person. And it's my pleasure to make this award to Elizabeth Buchanan. well deserved.
Completely and utterly speechless. I was.
The first time.
Is it going to be Charlotte or is it going to be Judith?
A number knew that what was happening and kept it very quiet.
That's brilliant.
Without words. Thank you so much. I am so touched and overwhelmed. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very, very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're nearly there. Just a couple more thank yous. There is a working party who I fail every year to thank for organising this event, as they all know, led by Duncan Rawson, Chris Appleton, Tom Gribble, who sits on my left, Mark Campbell, Doug Jackson, and of course Wiz, who's been running around the room all evening. As far as I'm concerned, the several years that I've been opening and closing this conference, they have systematically become more and more interesting and better. And that is down to the man sitting in front of me, I think, predominantly Duncan Rawson, his little black book of people. So on behalf of everybody, thank you, Duncan. Not sure whether that makes up for all the years I've forgotten to thank you. But, if you want to come up and me embarrass you a little bit more, no? Okay. It takes several things to make a conference like this work. We've had some cracking speakers. It's all been set up beautifully. There are more people here than there have been for many years. There's another 150 sitting online, I think. And finally, of course, we need a good set of sponsors. And a thank you again to Complete Land Management. I've seen Anthony here somewhere. Yep, there somewhere. Simon, Laura from Maywin Baxter, thank you very much for coming along. Fantastic again. Ian, Graham and Alan from Lloyd's Bank, I believe, are here. Mr. Hench has gone shooting, so Daisy, Chloe and Libby are here from Richard Place Dobson, somewhere along the line. Good to see you all. Thank you very much for your time. Andrew Knowles and Becky Bowers from Fram Farmers. The NFU Mutual, and of course, Jamie from South East Farmer. Thank you all for financing this operation. South of England's been through a sticky time in the last few years. We just can't do anything unless it can pay for itself. And you have helped considerably. So thank you all very much. Pie and pints and everything else are in there. Charlotte, have you got anything else you want to say?
No, thank you.
Food. Thank you very much. Safe journey home.